Have you ever heard instructions addressed to you on absolutely any occasion? But our heroine was forced to listen to all the complaints from the man with whom she lived. Mia Fortuna did not have much patience, so she could not tolerate such treatment for long. But the girl was in no position to deal with her grumpy roommate. It was all because Matt Garciel was the ghost of the estate she had recently moved into. So the lady had to choose her words carefully just to remain safe and sound. After all, this evil spirit could very well physically harm her with the help of his powerful magic. As soon as Mia forgot about her situation, the atmosphere around Matt noticeably changed. The man did not hesitate to threaten the miss if he was dissatisfied with her behavior in any way. And poor Fortune had no chance to resist the ghost that demanded obedience. This is how the girl was forced to live for the last month, although before everything was different. Just recently, the heroine was an ordinary office worker who only cared about her salary. But then fate pleased the girl by making her the winner of a money competition. However, Mia was not destined to receive this winnings, because the lady died a little earlier. That's how she ended up in the body of a girl who was a minor character in the novel. At that moment, the heroine had no idea that she would be nothing special in this life. When she was reborn, the girl did not even receive even one of the most basic magical abilities, not to mention the fact that she ended up in a commoner family, as her clothes hinted at. So pretty soon, the girl realized that no one cared about her in this story. But happiness did not pass Mia by, because she now has a kind and loving grandfather. And as long as he was alive, the heroine did not think about anything bad, enjoying his love. But soon a lot changed in Fortuna's life, because without her grandfather, she had to move to the capital. No matter how bitter it was for her to leave her native place, the lady tried to be strong and cheerful. Meanwhile, in the capital of the empire, events were in full swing, which the lady found herself caught in. She found a real estate agency she knew nothing about before. The agency director said nothing to the girl when he found out that she did not have much money. Moreover, it turned out that he had several cheap housing options in mind. And from the very beginning, the proposed option was to Mia's liking, as she did not want to live in poverty. She didn't even believe that such an estate was really worth her small amount of money. The place was so huge that the agent asked the lady to stay close to him. The only problem was that inside this part of the building was in complete disrepair and ruin. Never before had Fortuna encountered such poor living conditions, and the co-owner was confident that his buyer would like all the outlandish things in the building. However, the heroine herself thought with horror about spending even a day in the estate. No matter how cheerful the agent himself was, the girl no longer believed his good words about the mansion. Mia could only hope that the other options would be no worse than this one. So soon, together with the agent, the lady went to the next budget house. From the outside, this place looked much more modest, but at least it wasn't as repulsive as the previous one. However, the girl found out the nuances of this house already at the entrance, which she was not happy about. The whole point was that the architecture here was not at a right angle, as usual. However, the man diligently did not notice that he was constantly moving to the side due to the tilt. The heroine understood perfectly well that she would not be able to get used to such riding around the house. No matter how the agent tried to persuade the lady, reminding her of her budget, she remained adamant. Then, the man admitted that he had another option that the client might like. With a sinking heart, Mia began to pray that the last house would really be right for her. And this time, the estate was several times larger than the first mansion shown. The heroine's mouth could not close, as she was too amazed by the space. The agent himself spoke beautifully about the mansion, in the hope that the deal would take place. What surprised Mia most was that she could move right now and live in this place for free. But there was no such thing as a free lunch, so special conditions awaited the girl. Fortuna was not prepared to keep this entire huge area with a bunch of rooms clean. Moreover, the lady was forced to sign a life sentence only in this estate. As soon as the heroine heard that she would be paid money for this, she immediately agreed. Luckily for the agent, he no longer had to persuade the girl to choose anything. Mia completely forgot about the consequences that might await her in this old mansion. So, she was impressed and signed the document, just to enjoy luxury for the rest of her life. The man's job was to sell the house, so he would never reveal its details. However, as he was leaving, the agent still sympathetically wished good luck to the lady who had fallen into his trap. The heroine had no idea that from now on, her peaceful life would never happen. Although Fortuna's intuition told her that something was wrong, she did not change her decision. And so, by evening, the lady had completely moved to the place where she was forced to live until her death. Mia initially understood that it would be difficult for her to clean this entire mansion alone. The only way out for the girl was to hire cleaning ladies, whom she could afford. But right now, Fortuna was so tired of moving that she didn't want to decide anything. She felt a little guilty about not having started cleaning, but she could wait. For the first time in a long time, Mia was able to fall into the deep sleep she had been missing so much. All the girl's thoughts were full of peace, because a new home had finally been found. Therefore, the lady no longer worried about anything and could fall asleep so quickly and easily in the new place. But the heroine couldn't even imagine that some male voice would wake her up at night. For some reason, although Mia heard the voice, she could not move, as if she were in a dream. Upon seeing the male image, the lady decided that she had suffered from sleep paralysis, and that was why she felt this way. And the unknown handsome guy continued to complain about the dirt throughout the estate. As a result, he even used magic to turn over all of the girl's suitcases to teach her a lesson. Only after this was the heroine able to move, desperately wanting to achieve justice for herself. But it turned out that there was no one else in the room, although Miss had definitely heard someone's voice. Mia had previously suffered from auditory hallucinations after nightmares, so she attributed everything to them. And only the suitcases scattered across the floor silently told the hostess that everything was true. At that moment, the heroine drove away any thought that she could have met a real ghost. She started cleaning up, since she couldn't sleep in this place anymore anyway. Mia didn't even suspect that the weightless silhouette was watching her closely from the side. Already on the first day of cleaning, Fortuna began to feel a lot of dissatisfaction with her mission. And every dirty word irritated Matt, so he indirectly hinted about it. However, at that time, the heroine did not believe in ghosts, so she attributed all her failures to her drowsiness. The girl obediently spent the entire morning tidying up the mansion, and now she allowed herself to rest. But Garciel was not satisfied with this arrangement, because he was still dissatisfied with the results of the cleaning. So, Mia, who understood nothing, was once again confronted with mysticism, which she had not attached any importance to. Anyone in the heroine's place would have long ago guessed that the problem was not her own carelessness. This is exactly what Matt was desperately trying to demonstrate by attacking his stupid roommate from the shadows. Once again, Fortuna fell for the clever trick of the ghost whose existence she denied. A little more, and the lady's moral tenacity could have led her to the end of her life. This time, the heroine couldn't just push the thoughts out of her head as she had done before. All because if she had just a few more centimeters, the girl would have said goodbye to her rebirth. But the arrogant and ghostly owner of the house showed no sympathy towards his new acquaintance. Mia wasn't one to be intimidated by strangers, so she stood firm in her boundaries. However, the girl's contractor and part-time owner of the house had no intention of leaving. Fortuna was not warned by the agent that she would be sharing this estate with an evil ghost, and Matt knew from the very beginning that this detail was spelled out in the house transfer documents. In a panic, the heroine rushed to the papers, which she had managed to carefully fold in the locker, and on the very last page, in small print, it was written that the house was ruled by a spirit. For the first time in her life, the heroine felt truly destroyed and deceived. However, now the lady had to fulfill all the demands of Garciel, who was the master under the contract. The man was not going to let go of the lady, who had finally fallen into his possession so easily. He intended to use foreign objects to hold the newcomer accountable. Fortune could do nothing to counter the spirit's magic, no matter how weak it was now. But for the heroine, the threat of the object hanging over her was many times more frightening than the signed contract. To avoid possible injuries, the heroine was forced to refuse to terminate the contract. Only in this way could Mia save herself from the wrath of the ghost, who was not going to let her leave the estate. All Matt needed was for the lady to clean his property well and efficiently. As long as the girl fulfills all the requirements, Garciel will have no complaints about her residence. But the heroine still couldn't get her head around the fact that she had inherited a ghost along with the estate. Before, she didn't believe that spirits could really live in the place to which they were attached. No matter how much Matt claimed that he was still alive, these words did not reach the girl's consciousness. But as long as Fortuna was cleaning the mansion properly, Garciel was willing to tolerate her stupidity. But the heroine was not happy with this forced proximity to the ghost of the mansion. She understood perfectly well that she would not be able to exorcise the spirit, otherwise it would have already been done. So the girl found herself in a desperate situation because of just one contract. But it couldn't stay like this, so the desire for justice flared up in Mia. As soon as the spirit turned away, Fortuna rode at full speed to the city to see the agent. Even in her worst nightmare, the heroine could not have imagined that her idea would be doomed. It turned out that the agency had disappeared somewhere in just one day, as if it had never existed. Seeing the grief of an unknown girl, one old man could not pass by, as he became interested. It was from him that Mia learned that the agency had urgently moved somewhere in just one day. This meant that now the heroine had no chance to correct her fate. The girl could never have imagined a worse outcome for herself in her reincarnation. So, in just a couple of days, Fortuna was ready to go crazy from the constant cleaning of the estate. She urgently needed any cleaning company to help with her household chores. It just turned out that many companies had long since refused to cooperate with the mansion. No one wanted to send people to a place that was known to be a real haunted house. So Mia was once again left to carry out all the demands of the disgruntled ghost alone. As much as the heroine didn't want to, it was not possible for her to move or drive out the spirit. However, the girl was advised to place an advertisement for recruitment in several newspapers. The lady immediately seized this chance, since otherwise she could easily go crazy. Thus, reluctantly, 2 more weeks of Fortuna's painful life in the huge mansion passed. The ghost nagged her for any reason, even if the girl left small stains around. And in the end, he began to find fault with Mia's appearance, which was the last straw for her. The heroine was afraid to respond angrily to the spirit only because he could use magic at any moment. And so the lady had to endure all his grumbling comments about a job poorly done. So, as soon as the girl heard the long-awaited doorbell, she was ready to receive the person. Mia was so tired of cleaning the estate that she didn't care who came as a worker. She was pleasantly surprised when she saw in front of her a handsome and stately guy with a sweet smile. Fortuna did not believe that this man came to her in response to an advertisement for hiring workers. But Dante Van Dyke, who was a powerful magician, responded for precisely this purpose. The guy was sure that he met all the requirements, but in fact he had a different mission. Mia hadn't read the newspaper ad before, so she understood why no one had responded to it. The requirements were so strict that it is a wonder Dante chose this place at all. The heroine could only hope that this guy was in his right mind. She needed a worker so badly that she was not prepared to accept even a madman. But it turned out that the magician's track record was so excellent that he could not be kicked out. Van Dyke himself confidently stated that more than anything in the world, he loved cleaning the estate. The lady still had many questions for the worker, but she could not fire him without reason. Suddenly, the heroine remembered the novel about the princess who was forced to fight. At the age of 20, the girl learned that she belonged to the imperial family. Then she stood up against her father, who sent her to the common people to win a place on the throne. And it was Dante who was summoned to confront the skilled and beautiful sorceress of royal blood. As a result, he sided with the princess and achieved a great coup d'etat. The heroine had no intention of getting involved in something like this, so she tried to refuse. The guy's face visibly darkened when the girl asked him to look for work elsewhere. Dante never thought that there would be anyone who wouldn't like his resume. His cold gaze pierced Mia through and through as the mage tried to find a reason for the refusal. The heroine was unable to resist fits of rage, and this time was no exception for her. Therefore, the lady immediately accepted the new worker, if only he would not kill her on the threshold of the estate. For some time longer, Van Dyke continued to glare angrily at his incompetent employer. But in the end, his face smoothed out, because the guy was happy that he was accepted after all. The only thing Miss latched onto was that there was a probationary period for everyone in her estate. In fact, Mia hoped that this would make Dante give up helping around the house. But all of Fortune's expectations were shattered, because the guy was satisfied with these conditions. He was eager to prove to the lady that he would be the best at the job in the world. So the heroine couldn't find the words to justify her clumsy refusal. As a result, Van Dyke was not lying at all, because everything he touched shone and sparkled like new. After his appearance, the estate was transformed, as if it had only recently been built. Therefore, Mia had no complaints about the assistant who so skillfully cleaned the entire house. The guy himself carried out his duties as if it was a piece of cake for him. Compared to him, the heroine felt like an insignificant incompetent because she couldn't do anything. Dante even cleaned up things that the lady herself would never have been able to touch with a rag. So, during all this time, Fortune did not find a single excuse to fire the skilled assistant. The heroine didn't have time to get used to the idea that she would have to live with this guy as a housewife. But Van Dyke himself did not consider it wrong to address the lady as a hostess. But in her past life, such words were not used for girls, so Mia was embarrassed. She would have preferred Dante to call her by her first name, but he couldn't afford it. The guy began to list other options for how he could call his employer, but each of them was much worse than the ordinary mistress he had called her before. The heroine's heart couldn't withstand the overdose of beautiful addresses that she didn't use, so Mia put an end to all this squabbling, letting Van Dyke call her Mistress. The guy wasn't at all against it, since it was this nickname that seemed appropriate to him from the very beginning. No matter how Fortuna tried to talk to Dante, she always thought that he was winning. Over the next few days, Van Dyke cleaned the entire estate almost without interruption. In the end, even Matt was pleased with the work of the new assistant, who was much better than Mia. The girl could not contain her indignation at the fact that her ghost still refused to accept her. But in fact, this attitude was deserved, because even now the lady did everything wrong. She accidentally started digging up ancient rose bushes that were highly prized at the market. But Garciel was forced to turn a blind eye to the actions of the lady who agreed to live in his house. But it even violated the beauty for which his estate had been most famous in the past. The girl had never heard of Rilke's roses before, which were so dear to the ghost. But what struck the lady most was that the spirit also expected her to skillfully manage the garden. But this territory was so huge that it was possible to build something else on it. Therefore, Fortuna preferred to believe that nature is best expressed in nature. And only Garciel did not fall into this trap, as he saw that the lady was shirking her duties. He wanted Mia to hire more people with combat skills soon. This is because Matt already felt the approach of opponents who would try to rob him. But the heroine was too self-confident to listen to the ghost's advice. It seemed to her that the spirit was making all the suggestions only to keep the house clean. Although Fortuna couldn't give up the idea that she would then be able to fire Dante, who was bothering her. Therefore, a new plan for making her life in the mansion easier came into the girl's head. To do this, she went back to the city to send out new advertisements for workers. Naturally, Van Dyke expressed a desire to go with the lady to help her with her shopping. But Miss couldn't allow him to do this, as she was very tired of all the cleanliness fanatics. Therefore, while there was such an opportunity, the heroine quickly ran away from the estate. She was still tormented by doubts about whether it would be possible to select suitable staff for this house. She was full of hope to fix everything and force the future traitor to leave the ghost's estate. It was for this that Fortuna needed assistants who were beyond Dante's capabilities. Mia spent a lot of time arguing with the newspaper editor, who thought his news was perfect. In the end, the heroine wasn't sure that the guy understood her correctly, but at least he agreed to think about it. However, a bad feeling still haunted the lady, although she had already done everything possible. Only a good shopping spree could distract Mia from her constant thoughts about the estate's new employees. But the price of the dress she liked turned out to be prohibitively high for clothing. No matter what discount the seller offered her, Fortuna still had no intention of buying this dress. So she pretended that she had forgotten her money at home and therefore couldn't buy anything at the moment. But this trick didn't work with the man, who was determined to sell the dress at any cost. The girl did not expect such a sharp change in mood from an ordinary street vendor selling various clothes. Before she could understand, she found herself in a prearranged and well-thought-out trap. The merchant's assistants surrounded the poor girl from all sides, waiting for her to make a frightened purchase. Mia immediately saw through this disgusting scheme, which many women have probably fallen for. However, the heroine was one of those who knew how to stand up for herself in such extreme situations. But the girl's loud words only angered the local street thugs even more. Fortuna had no idea that the rules of her past world did not apply in the story of a love affair. That is why she was unable to easily get out of an unpleasant situation where she had already been harmed. The only thing Mia could think of was to pretend to notice her opponent's underwear. No one could tolerate such shame, so the girl had a real chance to run away. But Fortuna didn't expect that the amount of force she applied would be too great. She just pushed the guy away slightly and he screamed as if his shoulder was broken. The bandit himself never thought that he would find himself in such a situation because of some frail girl. But at the moment, even his closest friends couldn't help him with the pain in his shoulder. Mia had no time to grieve over what she had done, because salvation was still only in her hands. However, this time the heroine did not have time to escape, because the merchant grabbed her by the shoulder. As a result, the lady fell to the ground, hitting herself painfully due to this unexpected fall. The bandits were seriously determined to teach the lady a lesson, but things didn't go according to their plan. As a result, the first indignant one fell to the ground unconscious immediately after a few sentences. His comrades immediately ran up to him, completely forgetting about the young clothes buyer. Fortuna did not wait for luck to turn away from her again, and ran away as fast as she could. In her haste, the girl did not notice that a figure was following her, which helped her escape from the enemies. Only after a few minutes did the heroine stop, and only because she ran out of strength. She hoped that she had managed to break away enough so that no one would pursue her anymore. But it turned out that all this time, Dante had been following his mistress just in case, and he helped her. The girl did not expect that the assistant would not stay at home, but would follow her journey. Only now did she realize that it was Van Dyke who had helped her with her pursuers at the market. The guy was sincerely worried about the lady, for whose sake he even took a job at the estate. It was only thanks to him that the girl remained completely fine, although she slightly injured her shoulder. However, for Mia, this was a mere trifle, so she didn't even pay attention. So Fortuna didn't expect the guy to be so caring for her. His approach made the heroine blush to the tips of her ears, as the guy was her type. Therefore, she once again proved that she was not injured at all in that altercation. Only Dante's distraction from Mia's pendant saved her from further questioning. The heroine herself did not attach any importance to it, since it was the only thing from her father. Since the girl was raised by her grandfather, she did not know her parents at all. Fortune did not have time to become attached to a man whom she had never seen before in her life. But she was interested in why such a skilled guy got a job as a housekeeper on the estate. As before, Van Dyke began to convince the lady that he simply enjoyed cleaning the house. Since he was an aristocrat, only servants always cleaned his mansion. But in this way, the guy wanted to take a break from the horror he experienced in the war. The heroine had read the novel, so she could understand how much poor Dante had suffered. In the original story, Van Dyke had already achieved incredible heights in the military field. But in the end, he resigned, because he no longer wanted to participate in anything like that. However, the man in front of Mia didn't look like someone who hated wars. Instead, his face expressed genuine sadness, as if the boy regretted the losses. And Mia couldn't admit that she understood the magician because she read about his life in a novel. But the girl managed to find other words of comfort to make the guy feel at least a little better. In response, Dante rewarded the lady with an equally sad smile, but still did not share his thoughts. Fortune could not force the assistant to open up, since it was not yet time for this. But thoughts about the sad guy did not leave the heroine's head even in her room, so she stayed up late at night and was able to hear a strange noise coming from the corridor of the estate. The lady hoped that it was Dante who came to her in the middle of the night to tell her about his past. But her plans were not destined to come true, because it turned out that robbers had broken into the estate. Fortuna was not prepared for the fact that there would be someone else in the house besides her acquaintances. The robbers themselves did not expect to stumble upon a person, but in this huge estate, it even played into their hands. While Mia was shaking with fear of the unknown people who had caught her so easily in the middle of the night. In fact, the opponents had no intention of harming the girl, since only she could help them. The leader gently hinted to the mistress of the estate that, with her assistance, she would not be harmed in any way, and Fortuna was ready to do anything, just so that everything would be okay with her in the end after the skirmish with the enemies. The bandits would never have been able to find the Rose Chapel on the estate without outside help. But the heroine had no idea what this place was, or where exactly to look for it in this territory. Among Mia's assumptions, only the recent situation near the locked door in the basement came up. The girl hadn't even had time to enter it yet, when Matt ordered in a stern voice not to do this under any circumstances. At first, the lady did not believe that she would really die if she were suddenly able to enter this strange room. In Fortune's eyes, the old ghost was simply hiding something like his deepest secrets behind the door. However, Garciel didn't plan to hide anything like that, because that room was indeed dangerous. At that moment, the heroine was glad that she had one less room to clean. But right now, knowledge of this place brought the girl a lot of problems, because the bandits became interested in her. Mia couldn't run away anywhere, so she was forced to obediently fulfill all demands at the point of the blade. To stay alive, the lady lied that only she knew the long password to that ancient door. This was not part of the leader's plans, as he wanted to get rid of unnecessary witnesses. But his accomplices believed the rumors that Mia was a witch, so they did not want to harm her. Only the leader openly laughed at these assumptions, although he also did not touch the lady. The heroine still couldn't understand how she ended up in such a sad situation for herself. But the girl had no other options, so she led the bandits to the supposed chapel. On the way, the boys happily discussed the fact that they had never seen anyone in this huge estate. Mia tried her best to ignore their useless chatter, so as not to show any emotion. But as soon as the girl led the robbers to the right door, the leader declared that the lady should open it. Fear pierced the heroine's entire body, because she clearly remembered that it was impossible to open this door. Fortuna's only hope was the unexpected appearance of Garciel out of thin air. But for some reason, the guy seemed in no hurry to materialize, although, like a ghost, he could appear anywhere. So Mia was faced with a terrible choice. She would either die from the magic of the room or from the knife. The girl tried her best to stall for time, just so the harmful ghost could come to her aid. The bandits tried not to interfere with her too much, since some of them believed that the miss really was a witch. The longest song the heroine remembered was the anthem of her country in a past life. It was this one that Mia began to sing, carefully stretching out the notes to make it sound even slower. Fortuna herself did not believe that, after this song, the door would open. But that is exactly what suddenly happened. For the first time in her life, Mia fell into true despair, because everything around her was not going according to her plan or desire. But this time, the robbers did not leave the lady alone, as they demanded that she come inside. Mia resisted as best she could, because she did not want to die at the whim of some people unknown to her. She still hoped that Matt would show up soon, and this whole situation would be resolved quickly and easily. Only suddenly, the bandits announced that they were now sure that the owner of the estate had disappeared. The reason for this was the advertisement for hiring workers, which Mia herself so cheerfully printed in the newspapers. And now the girl had to deal with the consequences of her actions, that they were armed. The bandits needed the Philosopher's Stone, which was located somewhere in this huge estate. In their opinion, it was with the help of this thing that Matt monopolized the entire management of the mansion. Only now did the heroine finally believe that Garciel was not just an ordinary ghost. True, this knowledge could no longer help in her unpleasant situation with the robbers. The boys didn't think at all about whether the girl would die, because they were only worried about their own lives. So the leader roughly pushed the lady away, and she fell into the room, her knees hitting the floor. At first, due to the pain in her legs, Mia did not pay attention to the situation inside the room. From the outside, it might seem that there was nothing remarkable or scary in this place at all, but the heroine's entire body was gripped by such a fierce cold that she couldn't even touch a tooth. In an instant, Miss was overcome by the temperature in the room, which was unpredictably low. In tears, Mia could only whisper the name of her grandfather, who always helped her out in such situations. Suddenly, the pendant, which was a gift from a relative, began to spread warmth around itself. Even from the other world, the grandfather looked after each of his granddaughters, not allowing her to die so early. Mia's heart was filled with boundless love and respect for the old man who was dear to her. But at that moment, somewhere in the depths of the room, something barely noticeably flashed, attracting the lady's attention. Only now did the heroine remember that she had actually been on a small mission from evil robbers. But curiosity was much stronger than caution, so the girl ignored the enemies. Much more attention was drawn to the portrait of a beautiful woman, which was not even covered in dust. Never before had the girl seen such an attractive lady, especially in a painting. Only in the corner of the portrait could the lady read a clue that this woman was Saint Rilke. This information confused the heroine even more, because not long ago Matt called flowers by the same name. But until now, it was unclear why this beautiful portrait was hidden so deeply. Moreover, besides this woman, there were also a huge number of portraits lying below. But the heroine did not notice the most important thing, since she did not start to clear away the ancient paintings. Therefore, She did not have a single correct guess about who these people were. The robber did not give the lady any opportunity to hesitate, as he was in a great hurry, so he demanded that Mia find him what she needed so much in 10 minutes. But then it dawned on the girl that this man was actually afraid to go inside the building. She took advantage of this and began to loudly mock the guy who could do nothing to her. All the chieftain's assistants couldn't help but laugh at the antics of Miss, who wasn't afraid in such a situation. Fortuna noticed that she had dragged out her time long enough, and now she was no longer alone. None of the robbers could have expected this, because the mansion seemed to them to be almost an abandoned place. But the leader's two assistants were grabbed by the heads with an iron hand so that they could not break free. Within a second, the boys were lying on the floor, having been skillfully knocked out by the attack. The leader turned around in panic, as he did not expect that reinforcements would come to the girl's aid. He saw Dante in front of him, fully prepared to deal with the situation his mistress found herself in. However, for this occasion, the man had a great tool in store for him, which he used. So the leader no longer felt like a loser at this unexpected moment. But Van Dyke had dealt with even greater difficulties, so he wasn't scared. Only Mia didn't know that the assistant could easily cope with the task in front of him. And just a moment later, the weapon flew out of the leader's hands, as if it had never belonged to him. Dante was so well trained that such a trick was no trouble at all for him. For the first time in his life, the leader encountered such a skilled guard of an almost empty estate. But Van Dyke introduced himself only as a housekeeper, which is what he was in this place. Despite all the girl's objections, the assistant quickly dealt with the unnecessary robbers. So, in just a moment, the lady saw all her enemies lying unconscious on the floor. Mia was even ready to believe that Dante had dealt with the people in just a few seconds. The guy's face really did indicate that he wouldn't be tormented by his conscience after such a deed. Therefore, the heroine did not know what to think about an assistant who could be so cruel. But it turned out that the guy simply skillfully knocked out all the robbers, although he could have killed them. The girl's entire body was trembling treacherously after the stress and horror she had just experienced. But the assistant caught the owner in time, although she stubbornly tried to move on her own. Mia, under the influence of adrenaline, felt neither pain nor cold, and wanted to return to her bed. But Dante could not let go of the lady, because he saw her knee damaged during the fall. Only after the assistant's words did the heroine realize that she had been experiencing pain all this time. She didn't even have time to notice how she got hurt, since she was too busy all this time. This injury only happened because Mia didn't call Dante immediately after she encountered the robbers. She waited until the very last minute for the formidable Matt to appear, but this time he let her down badly. Therefore, the lady found herself in such an absurd situation where nothing could be changed. All Van Dyke could promise was that next time he would definitely arrive on time. And now he tenderly picked up Miss in his arms, to carry her to the bed in his arms. He didn't even listen to all of Fortuna's objections, because the lady would have hobbled along for a long time on her own. This is how the heroine had to come to terms with the fact that she was being carried in arms like a princess. But even in the room, Mia resisted to the last, embarrassed by Dante's concern. However, the boy had treated wounds so many times in the war that he was confident in his abilities. Seeing his ironclad arguments, the lady could not refuse his help. Van Dyke even managed to bring all the necessary jars, so that the hostess would not need anything. Fortuna could not prove that such wounds healed quickly enough, all because no girl could resist Dante's sweet gaze. And the heroine was no exception, so she lost this battle, leaving everything to the guy. This is exactly what Van Dyke was trying to achieve from the very beginning, since the condition of his mistress was important to him. In a few minutes, he prepared everything necessary, which would have taken Miss much longer. The assistant noticed that the girl was quite brave and patient, since she remained silent about the wound. The whole point was that in this life, the heroine managed to learn one important lesson. She realized that it was useless to cry in many situations that were beyond your control. The girl's childhood was calm and cloudless, but soon her father went off to war. And then the supposedly kind Uncle and Aunt Murray took little Mia into their care. But their good relationship lasted until the lady's father stopped sending money. Since then, the little girl's life turned into a living hell, in which no one cared about her. It was at that moment that the girl realized that her tears would not help that enormous grief. And to this day, Mia remembered the lesson she had learned, although everything had been much better in her past life. Dante had no idea that this cheerful girl had once gone through hard times. However, Fortune herself could smile happily, because she had such a good assistant. Soon the guy had completely treated the owner's leg, but she still couldn't strain herself. However, the heroine once again tried to prove that she was stronger than she seemed. And it didn't end very well again, as the lady couldn't even stay on her feet. But the girl achieved a sincere and cheerful smile on Dante's face, which she was already happy about. The guy was even ready to help the lady change her clothes so that she would not need anything. But the heroine wasn't mentally prepared for this, so she didn't consider this option. In fact, the assistant offered to help as a joke, so he left the lady alone. And after just a few hours, the heroine was convinced that she didn't need bandages at all. The severe wound on his leg healed as if it had never been there, and not even a hint of a scar remained. The lady discovered this ability when she found herself unharmed after falling from a height, and from then on, all her wounds healed very quickly, so that Miss did not have time to notice them. Out of pure politeness, the heroine left the bandage in place, because Dante tried so hard. But since the wound no longer bothered her, it was time to move on to her direct duties. From early morning, Mia searched the entire estate with loud screams for the ghost, who never appeared. She looked under every surface, but she couldn't find Matt anywhere. And so Van Dyke caught the girl searching among the bushes, which she had not expected at all. The lady honestly admitted to the guy that she wanted to communicate with the unbearable spirit of this estate. It turned out that Dante didn't just show up in this place because he was going to take out the trash. However, the lady clearly remembered that today, according to the plan, was not a day for ordinary trash. Only after a moment did the girl realize that the guy was referring to the robbers from the chapel. But Van Dyke had no intention of taking his mistress with him on this important and difficult task. He was worried that the lady's leg was still not healed enough for such trips into the city. Mia couldn't tell that her leg no longer bothered her, because it had completely healed. So she quickly found another suitable argument, because she threatened to go on her own. After this, Dante had no choice but to give in to the restless girl. They both ended up using disguises, wearing the clothes of average commoners. And in exactly this outfit, the guy and girl showed up at the police station with information about the thieves. Mia was determined to succeed, just to get rid of the people in the chapel. But there were a lot of bad rumors circulating about the Garcial estate, which the man was familiar with. Therefore, he did his best to refuse help to the parishioners, not wanting to come to that place. No matter how much the heroine was indignant, it was all just dust in the eyes of the lazy policeman. But he didn't expect that the man next to the girl would turn out to be a higher-ranking official. Dante deliberately revealed his name, because he knew perfectly well that no one could refuse him. As proof, he showed his badge, since he was retired. Realizing what kind of person was in front of him, the man could no longer refuse the request. But the lady didn't know that her employee had not actually been discharged from the army. It turned out that Dante himself did not know about this until recently, because his superiors did not let him go. Mia could understand why the generals did this, since Van Dyke was a powerful mage. Moreover, only this person could easily solve such complex issues. But unexpected complications arose, because the policeman was surprised by the lady's relationship with the guy. Fortuna had previously suspected that her nickname might seem inappropriate to other people. She explained as best she could that they were simply in a business relationship with such treatment. At the same time, the lady was dissatisfied with the assistant, who did not hesitate to call her mistress everywhere. Van Dyke himself sincerely didn't see any problem with this, since he was used to calling Mia only that way. The girl once again retreated before the sweet face of her assistant, with whom she could not be angry. So with a sigh, she swallowed the indignation that was about to spill out onto the guy. This is how Van Dyke cleverly avoided possible punishment, which he actually knew very well. Meanwhile, in the chapel of the Garcial estate, the robbers were trying their best to find a way out. The leader was the most angry of all, because the whole group had fallen into the hands of the housekeeper so easily. His assistants still believed that the whole thing was due to the witch's blood of the new mistress. Many remembered that it was this girl who, with just her touch, defeated her comrades at the market. But these dialogues did not last long, since the leader noticed someone else's presence. A disgruntled voice, chilling to the point of trembling, sounded somewhere in the depths of his subconscious. Matt finally showed up and promised that all the robbers would die a horrible death. The leader was not prepared for such a situation, because it was useless to fight the ghost. He was sure that the owner of the estate had disappeared, but it turned out that this was fundamentally untrue. With one appearance, Garciel changed the mind of the stupid leader, showing him his furious face. The thin cry that the leader let out in fear would have been the envy of any girl. In a panic, the man began waving his weapon, but none of it could save him. Meanwhile, Dante and Mia peacefully returned to the mansion, unaware of the horror within. The girl took advantage of the moment and asked her assistant about the philosopher's stone. She didn't expect that he would be well aware of the legends about this item being in Garciel's possession. The lady looked at Van Dyke with suspicion, as if he might have come to work for her on purpose, but the guy immediately declared that it was useless to steal the stone, because it had to choose you as its owner. The thieves' mistake was that they hoped to gain possession of the stone by chance. Only Mia knew how foolish the original plan of the robbers, who were looking for luck, was. Matt constantly appeared before her and was always dissatisfied with some of the lady's actions, so she could only hope that the guy wouldn't show himself to the police. As soon as the man appeared, he pleadingly asked Dante not to report him to the management. The assistant was only interested in dealing with the robbers, so he maintained a stern appearance. Fortuna did not immediately notice that, although she was the mistress of the estate, no one was looking at her. All the police officers by default obeyed only Van Dyke, who had a higher status than them. Soon the invited guardians of order reached the chapel in the basement of the estate, but it turned out that there was nothing left to take, because all the robbers were dead. Their mangled bodies lay scattered throughout the room, and it was clear that no one had survived. This news was unexpected for the heroine, who had only seen these people yesterday. She looked at Dante suspiciously, and the guy couldn't help but notice this strange look. It was important for Mia to find out for sure whether the assistant was not involved in the death of the robbers. Van Dyke was deeply offended by the fact that the hostess thought of him first. But the thing was that after yesterday, the girl could no longer be sure of anything. As much as she didn't want to believe Dante, her fear of his abilities was much stronger. The awkward pause that arose between them was only saved by another shout from the policeman. It turned out that one of the bandits had a clue about what happened in the chapel right in his hand. One of the dead men was clutching valuable jewelry tightly in his fist. The police officer was forced to check precisely to understand the whole situation. And indeed, real diamonds, of which there were quite a few, fell out of the dead guy's hand. It was in Dante's interests to make the police think that these guys had not divided the money between themselves. But the policeman doubted whether the gentleman in front of him was really clean. However, pressure from Van Dyke left the man no other choice. The assistant skillfully conducted the investigation on behalf of the invited guests, noticing that the bandit leader was not there. So the guy assumed that the man had run away with the money after killing everyone else. No matter how much the policeman doubted this theory, he had to accept it as the truth. He tried his best to please Dante so that he would give him a good recommendation. So the policeman's role in this case was purely nominal, and everyone understood this. All the guests left the mansion as quickly as possible to avoid running into a real ghost. So soon, Mia and Dante were left alone again, and this time without any corpses in the chapel. Fortuna still didn't believe that the assistant was telling her the truth about the robbers, and Van Dyke was offended by the girl's distrust because he tried to do a lot of good for her. The heroine herself could not explain why the deaths of the thieves seemed strange to her, but the guy didn't intend to take anyone else's life, because he had enough of that during the war. The role of a kind and caring person was not just an image for the former commander, and from his sad eyes, Mia saw that at that moment, the guy had no intention of lying to her. The lady froze in surprise, because all her prejudices had deeply hurt her faithful assistant. Too late, the heroine realized that she had jumped to conclusions about Dante, but time was lost, and now Van Dyke was disappointed in his beloved mistress. Mia herself didn't expect that her distrust could hurt someone so much. She couldn't allow herself to leave things like this, as it would only continue to hurt Dante. So the girl abruptly turned the guy towards her, who did not expect such speed from her. As quickly as possible, Fortuna asked her assistant for forgiveness before he left. Mia's recognition was important to the guy, because it was for her that he had been trying all this time. He could see in the girl's eyes that she was sincere in her intention to trust him in the future. But in exchange for forgiveness, Dante asked for one wish, which the lady would have to fulfill. Van Dyke liked to have aces up his sleeve, so he agreed to forgive Miss, Mia once again felt as if she had fallen into this cunning man's trap. But there was no turning back, because the girl herself wanted to achieve forgiveness at any cost. As soon as they entered the mansion, Matt immediately admitted that he had killed all the robbers personally. The ghost was the last person Fortuna would have thought of, as he had not appeared for a long time. Therefore, his confession shocked the lady to the depths of her soul, who was prepared for any other outcome. Mia was seriously angry because of Garciel's willful actions for not saving her yesterday, but none of her screams reached Matt's conscience, which simply didn't exist. Moreover, he used magic to shut the girl's mouth so that she would no longer yell at him. Matt had his own reason for doing this, because he could not let the robbers go without punishment. That is why the ghost created the illusion of a fight for the jewels, so that there would be no questions. The girl couldn't deny that Garciel's strategy made sense, even if she didn't like it. As a result, the lady began to compliment the spirit, just to appease him with her behavior. It worked, and the arrogant ghost opened Mia's mouth, which is what she wanted in the first place. The heroine did not mind creating a few poses to ensure an easier life for herself. But even such behavior did not soften the heart of the unbearable and nasty owner of the estate. But the lady was genuinely interested in finding out what the philosopher's stone was. She remembered perfectly all the greedy words of the thieves and wanted to find out more from the spirit. But Matt felt something that prevented him from launching into an explanation in front of the lady. He did not make the girl happy when he announced that guests would soon arrive at the estate. Fortune was horrified by this alternative, having just dealt with the robbers. But Matt was willing to wait for these guests, as they could bring benefits to his mansion. Nothing happened until the evening, so the heroine managed to forget about Garciel's words. As usual, she brought food to bed, for which she received a scolding from the neat Dante. Suddenly, a huge earthquake shook the entire estate and made the miss scream in fear. Unlike the girl, the assistant was not at all scared, since he immediately understood what was going on. He carefully reassured the hostess, who was ready to die of fear right then and there. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected doorbell, which the ghost had warned about. Mia panicked and decided that they were thieves, but they would never have warned anyone about themselves. In the end, it was Dante who greeted all the guests, since the heroine was not mentally prepared for this. When she looked out from behind the guy's shoulder, she was very surprised at the sight of guests. They turned out to be a strange-looking trinity, consisting of a child, a knight, and a demon in a human body. The boy's name was Ezekiel, and he was the head of the magic tower, something the lady did not yet know. The girl had no idea what the three of them were doing on the estate's doorstep so late at night. She was answered by a swordmaster named Killian, who was forced to always wear armor. It turned out that all three of them had come to work in the mansion, and the demon Eluard was no exception. It took the heroine some time to look at the magnificent resumes. But then Matt, who unexpectedly appeared and hired new employees, made a decision for her. Only now was Dante able to get a proper look at the owner of the estate, who rarely appeared. It was he who made all the most important decisions, so he allowed the trio to stay in the estate. But Mia was unhappy that no one took her personal wishes into account. However, the ghost did not even listen to the girl, as he immediately disappeared into thin air. This is how the unexpected guests easily settled into the mansion, contrary to Fortune's wishes. The heroine was instantly left out of work, although she believed that she could at least decide something in this place. The next morning, the lady was frantically thinking about how to drive all the people out of the mansion. She understood perfectly well that she would not be able to compete with these people in terms of skills. And most of all, Mia was frightened by the demon Eluard, who behaved extremely seductively towards her. As a result, Dante wasn't the biggest problem, because now there were these three. The assistant brought the hostess breakfast early in the morning to invigorate her before the day's tasks. But Fortuna hadn't had a good night's sleep, so she wasn't ready to work at the estate. Dante himself had nothing against these people, who divided the responsibilities among themselves. But the heroine considered it her duty to drive out the trio before they settled in here. But everything was so simple for the lady, because Van Dyke had a message for her from the ghost. It turned out that Matt had forbidden Mia, under penalty of death, to fire any of the employees. The memory of the fallen chandelier was fresh enough for the lady to fear Garciel, so the heroine had to give up her desire to fire the newly arrived workers. It came as a surprise to her that Dante also wanted to get the new guests fired. Mia really wanted to replace Van Dyke, but she never got around to it. So the girl will have to continue to live under the same roof with a possible terrorist. However, the lady could not admit to the guy that she was actually very afraid of communicating with him. So she once again pushed the cleaning onto Dante and ran away as quickly as possible. As soon as Mia stepped into the estate courtyard, her opinion of her assistants changed radically. In just half a day, Killian was able to bring real beauty to the garden, as if it had not been devastated. But before, the lady had lived in this place for several months, but was unable to influence anything. The knight was enthusiastic about his work, because he enjoyed such gardening tasks. But the lady could not believe that this man, without a drop of magic, managed to recreate the garden. Fortune deservedly paid the knight compliments, for he did his job flawlessly. But the miss still had questions about why the guy had come to this particular estate. Killian admitted that since Dante was hired here, they should have treated him well too. Mia did not understand a word of the knight's reasoning, because he explained himself too verbosely. But she guessed that Van Dyke and Killian had met on the battlefield before. This shocked the heroine, who believed that all the people in her life were nothing more than coincidences. But what surprised Fortuna most was that the knight didn't just wear armor all the time for no reason. For some reason, this guy was in for a lot of pain if he removed his artifact. Before, the girl had not thought about how much evil the Empire had inflicted on its soldiers. The only thing that made her happy was that Killian was now fully enjoying his new life. These details again made it difficult for Mia to make the decision to fire the new assistant. The lady's wild imagination suggested that the knight might experience difficulties during his shower, but the guy guessed from the hostess's face what she was thinking and said that he was temporarily removing his armor. Fortuna left the knight, with whom she had managed to become quite close during one conversation, in confusion. The more she interacted with the assistants, the less she wanted to fire them. Here on the horizon appeared the demon Eluard, whom the lady feared most of the three. Never in her life would the girl have thought that she would hire him as a butler. According to legends, this demon sent a huge number of diseases to people in the past, but now he was quite peacefully fulfilling the role of a butler, without trying to harm anyone. This created even more confusion in the lady's head, because she didn't know what to believe. Moreover, Mia had no idea about the existence of the estate's mailbox, which contained the letter. It so happened that the message lay there for a long time, and Miss could not read it herself. But then Eluard distracted the girl, because he had managed to study the financial issue in the huge estate. Fortuna completely forgot that she had to pay taxes on the property, which was huge, so the amount that would have to accumulate in the future struck her to the depths of her soul. Naturally, the heroine wanted to reduce the amount of tax expenses by any means possible, and Eluard had several solutions that he could offer to the new owner. It was possible to make charitable contributions to organizations so that the estate would be treated with leniency. It was also possible to create fake accounting to hide one's real income. But none of these options suited Mia, who didn't understand such things. Then Eluard smiled slyly and hinted that there was one very effective method. His approach confused the lady to the tips of her ears, which the demon himself was only glad about. But Eluard picked the wrong person, because the heroine didn't realize what he was hinting at. Even the resourceful and cunning master of the other world could not foresee this, so he had to honestly admit that he had talked to the girl about a real marriage. Only this detail could allow Mia to forget about all the problems with possible tax debts. Through marriage, many girls avoided many financial difficulties with estates, and the heroine could not deny the fact that such an opportunity was tempting for her. But the girl didn't have a single man in mind whom she could marry. Eluard's kind smile hinted to the lady that he was not averse to taking on such responsibilities. But Mia did not consider herself worthy of the demon himself, who was many times more experienced than her in everything. Such a groom would seem like an enviable candidate to many ladies, even despite his past. However, the heroine was firmly convinced that she should not get involved with a non-human creature. But the girl overlooked the fact that the demon knew how to seduce any kind of people. So he began to seduce Mia with beautiful speeches so that she would accept his proposal. Eluard saw that Fortuna was almost ready to agree to marry him. The girl really melted under the pleasant persuasion and compliments that the demon showered upon her. But then a realization struck her, because the lady realized that Eluard was not doing anything without reason. At the very last moment, Mia was able to refuse the assistant who almost chatted her up. As a small revenge, The demon fled the estate without reading Mrs. Message, so the heroine was once again left completely alone with unpleasant problems. Hunger suddenly overcame Fortuna, who had not had time to have breakfast since early morning. She remembered that Ezekiel had promised to be a good cook, so he had to cook something. So the lady went to the kitchen, completely forgetting that she needed to read the letter. The boy greeted the mistress with displeasure, as she seemed to be wandering around the estate with nothing to do. In turn, the lady did not like the tone of the child who addressed her informally. However, Ezekiel did not feel a drop of guilt for his behavior, because he considered himself better than Miss. Mia kindly attributed Izzy's character to his difficult past, as she dreamed of food. But it turned out that the boy had not prepared anything, since there was not even any food on the estate. Fortuna was surprised to realize that the child was also speaking informally about Dante. She didn't expect that Ezekiel would also be familiar with Van Dyke due to their battles together. Izzy himself did not hide the fact that in the past, he often saved the life of his current housekeeper. The heroine could hardly imagine how this little guy could even cope with enemies on the battlefield. She had no doubt that the coup in the Empire was justified, because Izzy was a child. The desire to somehow entertain and support the boy completely took over all the lady's thoughts. The head of the Tower of Magicians did not have time to refuse the girl, so he was forced to go with her to the market. The boy didn't even blink an eye before Fortuna was already rushing off to get ready for a short trip. Since Ezekiel couldn't let the lady carry the bags alone, he went with her. While he was getting ready, the heroine prepared everything necessary for the trip to the nearest market. But the boy had something much better in store for quick movements. As soon as he called his pet, the huge dragon almost blew poor Mia away with the wind. The shock written on the heroine's face could be sketched for future generations to see. Fortune's reaction was not long in coming, because the lady decided that the dragon was dangerous. No one had time to explain to the girl that this dragon actually did not pose any danger. Before, the lady had not thought about how the 3 guests arrived at the estate yesterday. Only now did it dawn on her that the temporary earthquake was caused by the creature's landing. Ezekiel proudly presented a housewarming gift in the form of a powerful dragon, but the heroine was not ready to accept such a creature as a pet. The magician did not grieve for long about this, since he had long wanted to cook something from the dragon. Toto himself was extremely displeased with this proposal, but did not attack his owner. Meanwhile, the boy, in all seriousness, activated magic to kill the dragon. The creature looked pitifully at the girl, hoping that she would still save him. And only at the last moment, Mia managed to stop the baby, just so that no one would get hurt. Thus, the lady took on the unwanted responsibility of caring for the dragon, something she herself did not expect. The girl was most confused by the size of the creature, which could not turn around in the yard, and the magician had a suggestion about this, so that Toto wouldn't accidentally break anything. As a result, the dragon became a dragonette, although this was only a temporary solution. But the lady liked this transformation so much that she had nothing against Toto, so the heroine spent some more time on her pet, admiring his reactions to her. It was only after several hours that Mia and Ezekiel finally reached the popular market. Fortuna happily grabbed food from all sides, as she was still very hungry. She was having a lot of fun with her assistant, despite the fact that he responded to her with nothing but grumbling. But this happy moment for the lady did not last long, because she heard a familiar voice. It turned out that at that very moment, Georgie Murray, who was Mrs. Cousin, was in the market. The girl was not at all happy about such an unwanted meeting, because she was trying to forget her family. But she didn't have time to escape from the narcissistic relative who intervened in the conversation. This man was the cause of many nightmares for Mia, so she was not happy about this meeting. 15 years ago, the heroine lived with the Murray family, where the children constantly bullied her. At that time, although there was an adult inside the girl, she could not protect herself from her family. So the lady had to endure the ridicule of the older Georgie and Ermengarde. Mrs. Life was so bad that she practically had to pick up food from the floor. She tried to do everything possible to survive, no matter how bad the food she received was. But Mia's troubles at that time did not end there, because there were many other terrible things. So Aunt Gertrude blamed her relative for any loss of things in their huge house. The girl could deny her guilt as much as she wanted, but no one was interested. The Murray children deliberately set up their unloved relative by laughing at her. Ermengarde enjoyed the look of horror on Fortuna's face, just as much as Georgie did. so the heroine could never call any of them her real family. As soon as the girl grew up, her aunt and uncle told her that she would work in a factory. Gertrude justified this by saying that Mia's father no longer sent them any money for her accommodation. No matter how difficult it was for Fortuna at that moment, she could not remain without food any longer. So, despite her young age, the girl did everything to survive in this family. Although her life was full of difficulties, the heroine tried her best not to despair. She stubbornly fought for her existence, waiting for the time when she could get away from the Murray family. And exactly this chance presented itself to the girl, to whom the postman suddenly addressed. He brought a letter for her, but no one taught Mia to read in this life. However, the lady could not miss such an opportunity, so she persuaded the guy to read it. Although it was not the postman's job, he still could not refuse this poor girl. This is how Mia learned that all this time, her own grandfather had been desperately trying to contact her. She immediately sent a letter to her grandfather with the help of her boyfriend, and he sued her from the terrible Murray family. Since then, the heroine's life changed for the better, because the old man did not spare anything for her. But this happiness was short-lived, since soon after, the grandfather died. Only Mia was sincerely worried about the departure of this bright person from life. It was at this very moment that the Murray family reappeared, wanting to claim part of their relatives' inheritance. Gertrude personally came to the funeral to make sure Mia was grown enough. Fortuna immediately suspected that this woman would never just visit the old man. During his lifetime, no one from the Murray family ever bothered to come to the aid of the elderly man. But now the aunt has shown up with the desire to marry the lady to a prominent and wealthy count. Gertrude kindly promised to take care of the deceased old man's entire inheritance. But these words only angered the heroine even more, as she saw that nothing was sacred to her aunt. The heroine was ready to give everything in the world, just so that her grandfather would be alive again. But her relatives would sell their souls to the devil just to get some profit with her help. It was for this reason that the heroine fled to the capital, but again met her hated cousin. Mia was terrified that she would have to deal with such vile people again. Georgie himself believed that all his pranks were just harmless childish antics, but the heroine had been through too much to forgive her impudent cousin so easily. Murray turned out to be so narcissistic that even Ezekiel sided with the lady. The boy immediately warned that he would not tolerate rudeness towards the mistress. But his entire speech did not impress the guy, who measured everything by appearance and clothing. That is why the blow to the face was extremely unexpected for the pompous aristocrat. Georgie didn't have time to block the blow, so he quickly flew back several meters. This is how Dante once again came to Mia's aid, since he was very close. In fact, he was just strolling through the streets of the market, as he wanted to give a small gift. The guy was already anticipating the joy on the owner's face when she saw his sweet purchase. Suddenly, he noticed Mia and Ezekiel not far away, although he didn't know about their plans. And the girl's face expressed genuine anger towards his unfamiliar interlocutor. Dante heard the guy's last words perfectly well, and he didn't like them at all. That is why he allowed himself such a sudden appearance, which Fortune was glad about. Van Dyke could not calm down until his impudent interlocutor understood the lesson he had been given. Georgie recovered fairly quickly, as the assistant did not use full force. As soon as Murray began to insult the girl again, Dante regretted his pity. He couldn't allow the lady to worry about an incomprehensible and evil relative. So Van Dyke started beating the guy again to get him to say sorry. Seeing this picture, the heroine had no doubt that Murray would be in trouble. But no matter how many blows rained down on him, Georgie continued to threaten the police. However, Dante's gaze still convinced the guy that he had better cover his mouth. It was important to the assistant that the relative ask Mia for forgiveness directly. But Murray found it extremely difficult to say the right words to a lady he did not respect. However, the desire to live turned out to be stronger than prejudice, so the guy still apologized. For the first time in her life, Fortuna felt that she was no longer afraid of her pathetic older cousin. Before, the heroine had never occupied a position higher than her named relative, and even in this position, Georgie could not tolerate touching from his unloved sister. Only Dante's threats stopped him from making further threats towards the hated Mia. As soon as the guy started speaking insincerely again, Van Dyke gently hinted at beatings. As a result, Georgie let out such a thin squeal, as if there was a little girl living inside him. Fortuna laughed loudly at her cousin, whom she had always feared and sincerely hated. But thanks to Dante, The girl realized that the guy wasn't worth even a drop of her attention. So the lady's confidence soared to the skies, and she no longer worried about her cousin. As soon as the boy and girl walked away, Murray began hurling threats at them again. But he didn't take into account the fact that Ezekiel heard every angry word he uttered. And the magician could not ignore the fact that his new mistress was being insulted by some stranger. So another punishment awaited Georgie. But neither Mia nor Dante took part in it. Fortuna did not feel pity for her cousin's suffering, since he himself was to blame for everything. So, no matter how loudly the guy screamed about revenge, no one took his words seriously. For the first time in her life, the heroine saw the evil Murray humiliated so much in a couple of seconds, and she couldn't help but celebrate this matter with her friends, who protected her from an unpleasant relative. A joyful smile appeared on Mia's face, who was no longer afraid of her former family. She was grateful to Ezekiel for not leaving her in this difficult and unpleasant situation. But the girl had even more respect for Dante, and no longer wanted to drive him out of the estate. The lady was pleased to know that she would always be under the protection of those close to her. After all, today Ezekiel and Dante did not allow her to be disgraced in front of her childhood fear in the form of her cousin. In fact, Mia had encountered kindness before, but she perceived it differently. But grandfather taught the lady that not everything in this life has to be paid for, and now she was finally convinced that goodness did exist in her life. But the very next morning, the heroine faced yet another ordeal in a huge estate. The whole point was that Izzy had absolutely no talent for ordinary and tasty cooking. Moreover, the miss never figured out the contents of the letter, which greatly interested her. Mia knew perfectly well that she wouldn't be able to read it herself, so she needed help. It was at that very moment that the girl noticed a ghost slowly walking through his domain. Fortuna had the nerve to ask the great Matt for such a small help, but Garciel's character hadn't changed at all, so he was against helping the lady. The heroine sincerely could not understand why the ghost was so strongly opposed to her, but the whole point was that Matt considered reading such letters insufficient for his status. No matter how much Mia tried to persuade the harmful ghost, he didn't take pity on her for a second. Then the girl took advantage of the moment and returned to the recent conversation about the stone. It was no secret to anyone that the philosopher's stone was located somewhere on the estate grounds, and the heroine insisted that she had to know all the details because she was the manager of the mansion. But even these ironclad arguments did not immediately make the ghost talk about the stone. He finally admitted that this thing was not something one owned, but something one chose and inherited. Only now did the lady realize that Matt himself did not know where the philosopher's stone was. The ghost's silence suggested that he had not really been chosen as an item, so he knew little. Garciel didn't want to waste any more of his precious time, so he left silently. As a result, Mia only developed more resentment towards the wayward spirit. But thanks to this, Dante, who could read that letter, caught her eye. Fortuna came from afar and first offered the guy her help in washing the dishes. The girl did not pay attention to all the objections of Van Dyke, who was familiar with her skills. At first, the guy still hinted that the hostess should just take a break from work, but suddenly he realized that he was pleased with such help from a girl, even if she was bad. So Dante allowed the lady to spend time with him because he had nothing to lose. Mia herself was thoroughly enjoying the peace and tranquility that Van Dyke provided. Only after some time did Fortuna move on to the matter for which she had undertaken her assistance. At the same time, she noticed that Dante did not immediately put all the dishes she washed in the dryer. Instead, the boy carefully wiped the cups again before putting them away. Of course, Van Dyke did not refuse to read the letter, as he was focused on washing the dishes. The heroine once again realized how much her assistant did not trust her to clean the house. Be that as it may, the heroine achieved her goal, which was much more important for her this time. It turned out that this letter was some kind of message from one manager to another. The previous assistant of the estate considered it necessary to convey important information to the current one. He asked that the memory of the first owner of this house, whose name was Rilke Piazza, always be preserved. And just in case, the manager left a small token in the letter that would bring him good luck. Dante himself was pleasantly surprised by the responsibility with which the man approached the matter. Mia had no idea that her position had previously been so important and valuable. It even got to the point that the previous manager wrote a letter transferring responsibilities. The heroine remembered a beautiful portrait from the chapel and was sure that it was about this woman. She could only hope that Dante could tell her at least a little about Rilke. It turned out that in the past, this woman belonged to the imperial family, but her cruelty forced the ruler to abandon such a relative that she killed many. This surprised Fortuna, who remembered that in the portrait, Piazza was addressed as a saint. Van Dyck recalled that at the very beginning of her journey, the woman actually worshipped God. But at some point, something went wrong, and she made a damn deal with demons. But after so many years, it was difficult to say how much of this story was true, and Van Dyck understood this nuance perfectly well, so he had no illusions about this legend. After all, even about Mia, there were rumors now that she was a powerful black witch, and her assistant was supposedly a demon who carried out any order of his beloved mistress. This once again proved to the lady that the stories about Rilke could indeed contain a lot of lies. The saddest thing was that none of the woman's relatives survived the emperor's order, so Piazza had to watch the mansion for a long time in complete solitude. Mia couldn't even imagine how lonely that beautiful woman felt. Now the girl is lucky, and she has never been alone, but it was a completely different time. So Fortuna did not think about sad thoughts, because she had faithful helpers nearby. Dante himself did not notice how he was becoming more and more sympathetic to this sweet and pleasant hostess. In the heat of the moment, he promised that he would always be there for Mia, so that she would not feel lonely. At first, the lady reacted calmly to such words, which implied a constant presence. But then it dawned on her that the assistant seemed to have proposed marriage to her. The guy himself seemed unaware of the meaning of the careless words he had just spoken, and Fortuna was seriously worried, because she did not consider Dante as a marriage partner. As a result, she knocked over the cup, and with incredible speed, Van Dyck cleared everything from the table. So the heroine again reduced all her actions to a regular joke, because she felt awkward. This only made her more embarrassed when Dante again stated that he needed to be near her. However, the guy was used to talking honestly about his plans, so he didn't see anything strange. This only made his every word make the heroine blush even more, as she perceived everything differently. Somehow, Mia came to the conclusion that Van Dyck was worried not about her, but about the estate. But the girl still didn't feel any better, because Dante's confessions hit her right in the heart. She was glad that there was such a skilled assistant in the house, and she was sad about the same thing. In the end, as many times before, the heroine simply ran away from explaining things to Dante. The guy himself did not expect that the lady would end the conversation with him so quickly, because everything was fine. But the huge amount of work around the house did not allow Van Dyck to think about the lady. Meanwhile, Mia continued to be upset about her assistant's adult reasoning. She didn't recognize herself, because she hadn't even paid attention to such a guy before. But, apparently, the fear of being alone again forced Fortuna to seek human warmth nearby. That evening, Killian and Ezekiel did not sleep, as they were holding a secret meeting between themselves. In fact, all the assistants in the estate had a task, but they began to doubt it. Only the head of the mage tower remained adamant, and believed that Mia was still dangerous. However, the knight had close contact with the girl, and did not believe that she could harm anyone. Only a limited circle of people knew that a powerful demon slept inside Fortuna, and once he awakens, a huge disaster will engulf the entire empire. Therefore, just in case, every assistant was ready to fight that creature. But until then, they silently continued to observe the life of a rather restless girl. The guys couldn't imagine how someone could be so awkward and inept at business. The heroine was unable to cope even with the little dragon that was causing her inconvenience. She eventually became so angry that she took a fighting stance to punish the prankster. Ezekiel instantly reacted to the possible danger by activating his magic. But it turned out that the lady had only planned to hit Toto on the forehead as punishment. The baby was very surprised by this act, because no one had dared to do this to him before. He flew away in a huff, finally leaving the cabbage heads completely alone. That's why Killian stopped the magician in time, because in reality, nothing serious had happened. But the head of the tower was dissatisfied with his friend, who was behaving so relaxed. The knight had nothing to say in response, because he really had let his guard down completely around the lady. With her active behavior, the girl made people forget about who was sleeping inside her. As a result, Killian had to justify the behavior of his restless pet. Mia calmed down only when the guy promised to take responsibility for Toto's pranks. First, she demanded that the gardener restore all the cabbage heads by tomorrow. But in reality, it was just a joke, because the lady wanted new ones to be planted. Killian instantly felt a warm glow of affection for his mistress, who did not demand the impossible from him. And even Ezekiel could not influence the opinion of his friend, whom he warned about attachment. Suddenly, Dante ran up to the girl, sensing magical energy near her. But the heroine was sure that no one near her had used magic in the recent past. Ezekiel did not admit that he had panicked and activated his abilities in vain. And Van Dyke guessed this perfectly well. But this time, he did not give up his old acquaintance. In fact, he came to inform the lady about the guests who were waiting for her at the gates of the estate. These were Murray's relatives, who came to the girl on a tip from her son. And it was precisely these people that the heroine least expected in this place, where she had recently settled. Mia was so immersed in her emotions that Dante noticed that she wasn't feeling very well. But the girl understood that if she drove away her relatives now, they would show up a little later. So she will have to come face to face with her real childhood fears. But no matter how brave Fortuna was, she did not dare to stand up to her uncle and aunt alone. So the lady discreetly asked the assistant to accompany her to that meeting. Dante immediately responded with a joyful smile, because he was pleased to support Miss. To her surprise, Mia noticed that the unpleasant trembling in her body stopped after his words. Only Ezekiel continued to watch with displeasure as everyone around him got closer to the girl. The boy was adamant that they should continue to stay away from her. Meanwhile, the relatives were in full swing, discussing what condition Mia was in now. They planned to take the girl with them in order to sell her later for good money. But the heroine was no longer inclined to obey her family, which was nothing but trouble for her. No matter how much the uncle and aunt tried to talk kindly to the lady, she didn't care. Mia didn't want to spend too much time with the relatives who had caused her so much pain. The girl boldly stated that she had not invited the family to visit, so they should leave. But Gertrude still insisted that they were actually close to each other. But in reality, there was not a drop of pity inside the woman towards Mia. She blamed fortune for all her failures, because it made it much easier for her to live on. Since childhood, the heroine has become accustomed to the fact that she was the only cause of others' troubles. And now, the lady involuntarily trembled all over with fear, being unable to resist her aunt. This is precisely what Gertrude took advantage of extremely skillfully, not hesitating to put pressure on her wealthy relative. But Dante couldn't stand this kind of treatment, so he stood up for his mistress. The woman didn't consider him to be anyone important, because the guy was wearing cheap clothes. But with his announcement that they were living together, Van Dyke drew attention to himself. Of course, as a man and a woman, uncle and aunt could not ignore such a statement. Only Mia realized how out of context her assistant's words had sounded. It was not in Gertrude's interests if the boy and girl actually ended up in a close relationship. But Fortuna was not going to report any more to her impudent and greedy adult relative. No matter how hard the aunt tried, she couldn't present anything to the grown-up girl. The heroine wanted to end this meeting as quickly as possible, because she was not happy with her loved ones. But Gertrude couldn't just leave her, as she needed the girl's marriage. Mia herself remembered that her aunt had previously spoken about some count who wanted her as a bride. But Gertrude had another daughter, so she could very well offer her to them as a replacement. The girl could not even imagine that that influential count wanted to see only her as his wife. The Murray family wanted to use Mia to better establish themselves in high society. Gertrude didn't care about her relatives' feelings, since she viewed her as a commodity. Although Fortuna had been prepared for such an attitude in advance, it still hurt her greatly. The girl remembered that she was not to blame for the ruin of the Murray family, because her uncle had worked on it. The man suffered from alcohol and gambling addiction, which caused the budget to fall. But my uncle didn't allow anyone to speak rudely about his less-than-stellar character traits. However, this time Dante was not sleeping, so he reacted in time to the attack on his mistress. So the man got hit instead of hitting his poor relative. Van Dyck felt no pity for these people, who were clearly doing nothing good. Naturally, the Murray family began to pretend that they were insulted and offended by such behavior. But even Mia couldn't sympathize with the arrogant and narcissistic aristocrats. As soon as the girl refused them, a whole bunch of unpleasant threats poured out in her direction. And only Dante was a ray of light for the lady, because he declared that he would take her as his wife in the future. This statement surprised the heroine so much that she even forgot to play along with her assistant. But what surprised Miss even more was that none of her relatives were impressed by this statement. Gertrude acted as if this wedding could never happen in her life. The whole point was that without their permission, Mia could not yet marry anyone. But Van Dyke personally didn't see any problem with this, since they could have waited a couple of years. The guy confidently stated that he respected Fortuna's choice and would always be by her side. This made Gertrude angry, because she could not take into her hands what did not belong to her. It was high time for Mia to put her vile relatives in their place, but she never did. She was able to calm her aunt down only by saying that a noble aristocrat stood before her. The woman was not sure about this, because Dante was dressed like an ordinary servant of the estate. But her husband turned out to be much more prudent, because he remembered that Mia lived in a rich mansion, and only Van Dyke was next to her, and they found money for housing from somewhere. This circumstance forced Gertrude to shut her mouth for a while, so as not to bring trouble upon herself. But the woman quickly remembered the invitation to the ball that all the noble aristocrats had received. With her questions, she forced Dante to go there with Mia as his bride. The heroine could not have imagined that her aunt would be ready to go so far in her revenge. The woman did not calm down until she had caused as many problems as possible for her relative. As a result, the lady felt an awkward pause between herself and her faithful assistant. The guy wasn't obligated to save her, but once again, he helped her out of a bad situation. Mia wanted to think of a way to refuse to participate in the ball without embarrassing anyone, but it turned out that Van Dyke himself was interested in participating there, since he had never been there before. Fortune always thought that many girls would surely run after such a handsome guy. But Dante himself did not pay attention to the ladies around him, as they seemed unreal to him. And now, only in Mia did he see a suitable partner for himself, which he told her directly. As before, the lady felt embarrassed by the guy's frank confessions. The assistant thought it was ideal that none of them had attended such events before. After all, now both Dante and Mia could prepare for the ball under the same conditions. The heroine almost burst out laughing when she imagined a guy in an apron at such an event. Despite all the fun, Miss couldn't help but worry about the fake engagement between them. She wasn't ready to actually get engaged to the guy, even though he insisted on it. Like everything else in his life, Dante was not used to doing something only halfway. But such words from Van Dyke greatly embarrassed Mia, who was accustomed to a different attitude. The girl promised that even without a wedding, she could make a mess of the estate every day. But in fact, Dante had good reasons for proposing marriage to his mistress. It turned out that he had so many advances from the ladies that he needed Mia's fictitious help. Thus, both the heroine and her assistant could help each other without consequences. That is why it was to Van Dyke's advantage that Miss agreed to play the role of his bride. He reminded her that he wanted to go to the ball together, and Mia immediately understood what he was talking about. So the lady became even more enthusiastic about this idea, although she had no idea of the consequences. For a while, they agreed to be bride and groom, and then the future will show everything in more detail. Although, as a joke, Dante already promised that he would definitely grind any candidates into dust. Knowing the guy's character, Mia wasn't sure that he was really just joking about it. But our heroine would not have been the writer of this story if she had refused opportunities. This is how Fortuna and Van Dyck entered into a false semblance of a future marriage. A little later, the lady urgently hugged Toto as she began to worry about the engagement. But it was too late to change anything, since the fictitious conclusion had already been approved. She was afraid that Dante might soon meet his true betrothed, as depicted in the novel. In this case, the guy will hardly be able to refuse the attraction that will begin between them. It was these experiences that captured the mind of the heroine, who did not want to be alone again. If Van Dyke meets the princess, there is a high probability that he will immediately go to her, and the lady was afraid that, following the assistant, all the others would also quickly leave her in the estate. And in that case, Mia will have no choice but to stay in the mansion alone for the rest of her life. No matter how hard the girl tried to think positively, worries did not leave her mind for a single second. But now, Fortuna decided to deal with problems as they arose, because she didn't even know about the rules of the ball. And the ghost, who was reading relaxed in the shade of the garden, could well close all her problems in this vast area. Mia was genuinely worried that she might not be able to cope with her behavior among sophisticated aristocrats. That was why she so desperately needed Garciel to explain at least some basic etiquette. The ghost was interested in this request, because he could demonstrate his knowledge. He gave the girl an example of how one of the ladies treats her at a ball, with the hope that Mia will like the food. In this situation, the heroine would be 100% delighted at the opportunity to eat for free in high society. This answer deeply struck the spirit with its inappropriateness, for the lady was far from the elegance of the aristocrats. Matt had no idea how bad Fortuna was when it came to high society etiquette. In fact, it should have been said that any treat from that lady would seem incredibly delicious. The girl herself would not have guessed that at any moment her behavior could be ridiculed in various ways. The ghost had a whole tirade about this, because he personally knew all the subtleties of communication among people. In the end, the heroine couldn't stand such moralizing, so she ran away from Garciel in search of a better teacher. Pretty soon she came across Killian, who was training Toto at that moment. Mia hoped that this pleasant person would be able to help her with her issue, but it turned out that the knight had never attended a ball before, as he was of low birth. So Fortuna had to continue her search, because she urgently needed another etiquette teacher. The girl was not one to give up after a few failures, so she did not get upset so quickly. Mia doubted that Elward would teach her anything good, and she didn't want to bother Dante. Therefore, the lady was left with one last option in the form of Ezekiel, who was unhappy with her choice. Mia managed to surprisingly quickly appease the boy with compliments, which he was eager to receive. So, within a minute, the head of the magic tower changed his anger to mercy, agreeing to be an etiquette teacher. Ezekiel was rarely praised, although the boy sincerely enjoyed hearing any compliments directed at him. That's how easily and naturally Mia persuaded the magician to at least teach her something for the upcoming ball. It turned out that Fortuna didn't even have a suitable dress for the event, since she had never attended one before. And of course, Ezekiel could easily help the hostess in solving this difficult issue. Suddenly, the boy himself realized that he was beginning to succumb to the incredibly friendly charms of young Fortuna. So he had to disappoint the girl by saying that right now, there was already a lesson for the next few days. The heroine didn't expect that the magician would prefer cooking and cleaning in the kitchen to teaching her. She imagined with horror how she would deal with these matters herself, without the paperwork. Ezekiel's cooking became better and better every day as he practiced constantly. The boy almost completely abandoned the use of magic, which he had abused at the very beginning of his training. That's why he had to manually sort through all the products, which took time. For the first time, the boy allowed himself to sincerely admit that without magic, he could do little. Mia looked at the child sadly, as she guessed what had been bothering him so much all this time. The magician began to feel burdened by the nickname of genius, because without his abilities, he could do practically nothing. A burning desire to support her friend flared up inside the heroine, and she did not resist it. So the girl reminded that the mistakes weren't as important as the situation when you hide them. It was extremely important for Ezekiel to hear such words of support, which no one close to him had ever said to him. Mia was sure that the boy had already achieved a lot, because he did not give up even on the path without using magic. Ezekiel couldn't help but admit that he hadn't expected to hear such a beautiful speech from the seemingly stupid mistress of the estate. But even such support from the girl did not make the boy change his mind about her. He lightly pushed the lady out the door, despite how rude it looked from the outside. The head of the magic tower did this also, because he did not want to show the blush on his face. It was unusual for him to admit that the girl's words had nevertheless reached his very heart. As a result, the heroine once again had to look for a teacher, and the only option left was a demon. At that very moment, he deftly appeared before Fortuna, as if he had been waiting for the right situation. Mia didn't expect the devil's assistant to perform such miracles of movement around the estate. But Elard didn't come for no reason, because he immediately began to pitifully play on the feelings of the young girl. It turned out that the omnipresent demon had heard perfectly well the request the miss was making as she walked around the mansion. And so he pretended to be sad that Mia hadn't come to him with this question right away. Mia barely justified herself by saying that the demon would hardly be able to tell her anything, since he was from another world. However, Eluard himself had no doubts about his abilities, as he participated well in balls. Under the demon's cunning speeches, the lady even thought about whether to trust him this time about etiquette. As a result, the guy quite calmly began to explain to his hostess the important lessons of aristocratic society. The most important thing in this place was to avoid making mistakes that would cause ridicule among people. And Eluard, like a demon who had long been circling among the aristocrats, knew the answers to all the questions perfectly well. But he would be a man if he simply revealed all the secrets of human society. It would be much more profitable for the guy if the lady signed a contract with him, which could give her a lot. And this time, due to an urgent need, the girl became genuinely interested in what the demon was offering her. Ellard promised the lady a star from the sky and his own use, if only she signed the contract. It turned out, however, that the price for this was the girl's soul, and she did not agree to such conditions. Mia was even a little disappointed by how hard the demon tried to lure her to himself. The guy himself didn't explain any details, since many people signed the contract without that. However, Fortuna was not one of those who was so easily taken in by the cunning verbal diarrhea of a creature from another world. Mia couldn't even take Eluard as her partner to the ball, because she already had Dante for that purpose. But this time, the demonic guy was determined to go all the way, so he insisted on himself a lot. This left the heroine completely at a loss, as she didn't understand why she had to choose among assistants at all. And at that very moment, Dante came to the aid of the confused mistress, who was being attacked by Eluard. The demon remembered perfectly well that their engagement was fictitious, and therefore did not want to retreat from his desires so quickly. It would not have been difficult for him to alter his memories so that everyone would think that he was the lady's partner. But Van Dyke knew perfectly well that without permission, the demon could not use his powers. Mia didn't expect that a real fight would suddenly begin between the guys for a place with her. This time, Dante was not going to give in, no matter what tricks the clever Eluard came up with. And then the demon suggested the option that the lady would go to the ball with the dress she chose. The heroine still didn't know how to calm her rivals down, so it was also beneficial for her. Anyway, Miss wouldn't have been able to choose a suitable outfit for the ball on her own. Surprisingly, Van Dyke had no doubt about his victory, so he easily agreed to these conditions. The demon only needed to get consent, as he immediately evaporated into thin air. And only Mia still didn't understand how her desire to learn something had led to this. Suddenly, Dante began to wonder when the mistress had managed to get so close to the semblance of a human. The heroine could not have imagined that from the outside, her communication would look so close. She quickly came up with excuses for herself, because she had no intention of trusting the cunning demon. The lady could have come up with a nickname for Dante too, to make it shorter to call him in public. But no matter how many options the girl tried, she didn't like any of them completely. It's all because the guy was good in the way he initially introduced himself to Mia. This decision encouraged Dante, because he had no intention of losing to his opponent anyway. But another surprise awaited the cunning Eluard, who had managed to prepare everything in advance. It turned out that Ezekiel had also gone to buy a dress for Fortuna, and had initially refused her. The boy pretended that he had run out of cooking ingredients, but that was not the case at all. This is because the head of the magic tower believed that he also had the right to participate in the selection. The lady did not expect that each of her acquaintances would be forced to attend the ball. It was only now that she realized how much Van Dyke had neglected his duties. But Eluard didn't give the girl time to think, because he was impatient to start trying on the clothes. But the first versions from the demon barely resembled clothes, let alone a dress. These jokes made the heroine immediately want to go home, because she was exhausted by these fittings. So soon, Eluard moved on with a laugh to real dresses, which turned out to be quite good. However, even so, Mia got tired pretty quickly, since she hadn't previously participated in choosing an outfit. But the mad demon did not let go of the lady until the very end, since she had not tried on all of his dresses. Dante tried to silently observe everything from the sidelines, although he sincerely believed that his options were better. Seeing the boy's participation in this farce, Ezekiel became noticeably angry with him for it. Van Dyke looked coldly at his friend when he reminded him of the order from the crown princess. In fact, Dante had no intention of fulfilling that strict task for the workers from the very beginning. Ezekiel didn't expect that he was the only one who had strictly adhered to the rules of attitude towards the task until now. The magician didn't relax for a second, because the demon inside Mia could wake up at any moment. But he could not predict the question of whether he would be able to kill the sweet and cheerful Fortuna. Dante had long ago decided for himself that the first thing he would do in that situation would be to try to save the lady. Ezekiel stubbornly defended himself, declaring that he would have no problem killing the girl when necessary. But her warm and supportive smile still stood before his face at that moment. Remembering this, the boy was no longer so sure of his serious intentions to kill. He watched Mia from the side, whose behavior did not foreshadow any catastrophe. The girl, like a completely ordinary person, was angry at the demon for his jokes about her outfits. So Izia began to doubt more and more whether there really was a demon sleeping inside her. Moreover, Van Dyke was sure that the princess's prediction about the future would never come true. Soon they had to return to Mia's clothes, who was able to pick out a beautiful dress. Both guys were amazed at how much the girl's appearance changed because of the outfit. But the heroine herself was not happy with this dress, because it was too heavy for her, while Eluard continued to insist that his choice had always been impeccable. However, this time Mia felt like she couldn't even turn around because of the weight of her dress. Then Dante entered the game and invited the girl to try on the option he had chosen. She ran off into the fitting room with interest, while Ezekiel was surprised at the necessity of these actions. The boy desperately insisted that he had come here only to talk with a friend, which had already taken place. But the guys were distracted from their discussions by the cheerful Mia, who was delighted with this outfit. The demon couldn't believe that he had lost so quickly in just one option. But the girl had no time to explain why she ultimately chose clothes from Van Dyke. So Eluard had to accept defeat, which he hated more than anything in the world. But Dante knew Mia better from the start, so he was able to easily win over his friend. As he was leaving, the demon made a few nasty jokes that slightly stroked his ego. Once Fortuna made her choice, it was as if a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Now the girl was not afraid to appear before aristocrats, whom she had never seen at a ball in her life. Miss was partly worried about the demon's condition, but Dante was sure that the guy was fine. It was much more important now to teach Mia all the rules of etiquette in high society. So from that day on, the heroine did not have even 5 minutes of time to rest, and for herself. Even Ezekiel unwittingly joined in this training, although he initially did not want to participate. But learning etiquette wasn't the end of it for the lady, as she also had to train her stamina. What Miss didn't like most was learning self-defense, even though the guys insisted on that too. As a result, Mia herself did not notice how she achieved significant results in all areas. However, the girl still wondered why such training was necessary at all. But Dante did not give Fortune a break, because the character of nobles was tempered in various ways. The girl did not argue with the assistants, only because they really knew about the ball better than she did. And so the long-awaited day of the banquet arrived, for which Miss had been so desperately preparing. Ezekiel and Killian were waiting for Mia downstairs in advance, and she took quite a while to get ready. Fortuna tried to take into account every detail, because many eyes would be looking at her at once. So on this day, the heroine could not allow herself to dress inappropriately for noble society. At that moment, Eluard appeared in the ladies' room, wanting to accompany her to the exit of the estate. The guy couldn't help but notice that the girl really did look like a real aristocrat. Although he was not happy to admit his loss, the demon did it with dignity. In fact, he came up with a small gift for Mia that could help her at the ball. They turned out to be earrings that allowed the miss to communicate telepathically with the demon. The heroine had no idea that Eluard could use his powers in such a useful way. And the demon was pleased with Fortuna's reaction, which he had managed to impress to the highest degree. Now the lady was not afraid of any jokes from the nobles, which she still did not understand. So Mia remained sincerely grateful to Eluard for such invaluable help. In the courtyard, Dante, already in full dress, was waiting for the lady he had been training all this time. The guy couldn't contain his emotions, so he exchanged a couple of compliments about the girl's appearance with her. For the first time in her life, the heroine felt like she was the main character in this novel, although she remembered that this was not the case. But when you have so many handsome guys around you, it's hard to think in any other direction. It just turned out that she would have to get to the estate for the ball with Killian's help. The knight had prepared for this moment in advance, but still gave the lady a little surprise. It turned out to be Toto, who could reach any distant place in a couple of moments. But Miss had never flown on dragons before, so she was not mentally prepared for this. A flurry of indignation immediately flared up inside Fortuna over this strange matter. But Van Dyke was sure that with this method, no one would dare to look down on Miss. In the end, even Mia herself perceived this move as a chance to be noticed among the aristocrats. For 20 long years, the girl was forced to live alone, but she really needed at least one friend. It was only for this reason that the heroine agreed to such an unusual journey on a dragon. Ellard waved affectionately to his hostess from below, as he could have teleported himself to the ball right now. But Dante and Ezekiel had to get there using a regular carriage without a drop of magic. The lady realized too late that all this time she had a backup option in the form of a cart, and in fact, she would prefer this very familiar method of transportation. But the heroine didn't have time to change her mind, because Killian was already getting ready to go to the ball. He gave the command to Toto, and with a breakneck speed, they flew up so that Mist didn't have time to squeak. The boys also experienced a huge gust of wind, but they were already accustomed to such situations with the dragon. Meanwhile, many aristocrats had already arrived at the imperial palace, where the event was taking place. But none of them could have imagined that one of the ladies would suddenly arrive on a real dragon. Toto's landing was so noisy that even the most deaf person could not notice it. For a long time after landing, the lady was afraid to leave her vehicle. Now, the Earth seemed to her the best place on Earth after such an aerial flight. It took Mia a moment to notice that during their landing, they had knocked off part of the roof of the Emperor's palace. This was noticeable even to the naked eye, as the damage was quite extensive. But Killian didn't worry about it, because he had done so much for the Empire that he could be forgiven. By this time, Ezekiel and Dante had already arrived at the place with the help of the cart, and the magician was shocked by the appearance of the hostess. After such a flight, both she and Killian looked as if they had not been through their best days. The heroine experienced such a strong shock that she could not properly explain what had happened to her. But the boy had the most complaints about the knight who could protect them both with his aura. As soon as the heroine heard this, her endless fatigue was replaced by well-deserved anger towards her assistant. Even Eluard did not expect that air travel would be so difficult for the girl. However, with the help of his magic, the demon easily corrected all the shortcomings acquired during the flight. But Dante was pleased with the impression the girl was able to make on the aristocrats around her. This is exactly what the lady was initially counting on, because she wanted to find friends in the new society. So Mia was the first to cheerfully greet the people standing near her. But, contrary to the heroine's expectations, no one dared to say anything to her in response. So, from the very first moments at the ball, Miss suffered a real defeat, which she experienced bitterly. Only her close assistants consoled the lady a little by being constantly by her side. Dante's main goal for today was to make sure Mia didn't have the opportunity to be sad for even a minute. Therefore, soon, the whole company entered the main hall of the palace, where the ball would take place. Unfortunately for the heroine, her relatives were already inside and were eagerly awaiting her arrival. Gertrude had hoped that Mia would not be able to attend the banquet due to her low status. But the girl's appearance was opportune for the woman who was going to introduce her to a potential groom. It was important to Murray that the lady pleased the Earl, as he was closely related to the church itself. But Fortuna didn't care about status, so she wasn't interested in this option. Count Kaiden Draxler's appearance could impress crowds of girls who adored real men, but he made no impression on the heroine, since she had different tastes. The man turned out to be an unusually polite and courteous person, but even this did not melt the lady's heart. What outraged the heroine most was that Kaiden decided for her that they would definitely get married. But the lady had not at all planned to build such an important relationship with a stranger. But fortunately for the girl, Dante immediately stood up for her and identified himself as her fiancé. At first, Draxler reacted coldly to Van Dyke, as he did not immediately recognize his identity. Meanwhile, the assistant was widely known in aristocratic circles to all people. That was why Kaiden was so happy to see the great mage, whom few had ever had the chance to talk to. The only thing that bothered him was that the guy introduced himself as a competitor, since he was Fortuna's fiancé. However, Draxler would not be a warrior if he so easily gave in to this unequal battle of the suitors. He honestly admitted to the girl that he wanted to be the second contender for her heart, right after Dante. But Mia didn't approve of this attitude, since she didn't even need the first groom. To the heroine's surprise, it was Eluard who stood up for her this time, something the lady could never have predicted. It turned out that the guy could not give up the position of the second groom, because he was sure that he himself occupied this position. Mia had no idea what Eluard, whom she didn't even have time to stop, was planning again. And the guy confidently stated that Killian and Ezekiel were also candidates for the groom right after him. Mia was frightened when she noticed how tense the rich count's powerful muscles were. But it turned out that the guy was delighted with the generosity of the girl, who was ready to accept everyone into the family. This finally convinced Fortuna that she should not have gotten involved with this man. No matter how rich Draxler was, it was only important to the girl's unpleasant relatives. Therefore, she honestly admitted to the man that she did not consider him as a future groom. And for the heroine, the reason was extremely simple, and consisted in the fact that the man was the hairiest representative. The girl shuddered at the mere thought that she would have to live with such a woolly husband. For the first time in his life, the reason for refusal was Kaiden's personal pride, because he loved all the hair on his body. No aristocrat had ever dared to raise such a problem before, so the Count was not at all worried. He wasn't ready to give up his hair for the girl, since no one in his family ever shaved. That's how Mia and Kaiden's love story ended, even before it had even begun for either of them. The man accepted with dignity the fact that he was not destined to live with Fortuna. The girl's family was against this decision because they had to return the Count's gifts. The head of the family, who had managed to spend almost all of his money on gambling, was most worried about this. Murray's wife had spent just as much on fine clothes as he had, so they had nothing to return. So the relatives quickly disappeared from sight as they ran after the rich and generous Draxler. The heroine could only hope that she would not see these unpleasant people for a long time. As soon as the main event began, the lady noticed that Dante had become suspiciously silent, but the guy himself diligently pretended that nothing terrible had happened to him recently. Although even the inattentive Mia could see that Van Dyke was quite offended by something, Miss could not be offended by the assistant in response, because his face was sweet even at such moments. It turned out that the guy was unhappy with the appearance of 3 more eligible bachelors in his hostess's life. He was sure that this place was destined only for him, but fate had decided things much more unpleasantly. Therefore, the assistant sincerely did not understand whether he alone was not enough for Miss. The cunning demon stated in time that Mia did not deny his words at the right moment. This is how the heroine found herself guilty of something in which she herself did not really want to participate. It would have been more logical if Dante had asked all these questions to his friends who supported Eluard. Ezekiel and Killian stubbornly pretended that they were not involved, but they were also part of the dispute. The head of the magic tower said that this was the only way to quickly resolve the issue, and his words seemed logical to the girl, so she no longer suspected her friends. But it turned out that the knight personally took part in the competition because he did not like to lose. The guy would never in his life allow himself to be placed lower than his demonic comrade. After all, the knight had never taken the last place anywhere before, so he didn't know what it was. So all the guys started quarreling among themselves again, as no one wanted to be the last one. To Mia herself, this argument seemed pointless, since she was not considering anyone as a suitor. Fortune was only worried about Van Dyke, who seemed increasingly sad from his friends' conversations. The heroine suddenly had the thought that the guy could simply be jealous of her towards them. But at that moment, beautiful music spread throughout the hall and distracted the lady's attention. Only now did she realize that it was time for all the aristocrats to dance. The girl was not mentally prepared to dance, but she still had no other choice. Dante admitted that he would like to receive the first dance from the hostess, since he was her faithful assistant. And Mia didn't have a single objection, because this guy really helped her a lot. But then Eluard intervened in the conversation, who also believed that he had the right to the first dance. Only Van Dyke remembered that the ladies were supposed to dance first with their partners. But the demon didn't consider this a problem, because if Dante died, he would be first in line. This is how, by chance, former friends turned against each other again because of a girl, and the heroine could not reconcile them, since she herself was the cause of constant quarrels. In the end, the demon decided to leave the responsibility for the decision on the owner of the estate herself. He smiled widely, as he was sure that Mia would definitely choose him. But Dante did not back down from his rival, wanting at all costs to get Mrs. First Dance. Fortuna found herself caught between 2 fires. Although she already had many problems, she had no idea which guy to choose for her first dance. In the girl's opinion, all this was nothing more than a childish argument, just for the sake of the argument itself. But both guys were extremely serious, because in high society, this was highly valued. So, no matter how much Mia tried to shirk responsibility, she still had to choose. The best thing Fortuna could come up with now was for all three of them to dance. Neither Dante nor Eluard appreciated the offer from a Swedish family to which they were not related. In the end, the demon still gave in to his opponent, because he saw how hard it was for the lady. However, he demanded a promise from her that the second dance would definitely be his. The joy in Mia's soul that the decision was made is difficult to describe in words. She herself pulled her partner, Dante, onto the dance floor, which he was noticeably surprised by. Fortuna was still having a hard time getting used to the manner of behaving at a social event. Although the girl tried her best, she constantly missed many points. However, Dante was generously ready to forgive his mistress as many times as necessary. So, with such a faithful and sensitive assistant, not a single thought troubled the heroine. Fortuna had no idea that she would reveal herself so strongly in Van Dyke's company. The more they talked, the more the guy attracted the restless girl to him. Dante's task was to make sure that the lady's first dance in her life would be remembered forever. And to achieve this, the assistant made every effort, constantly observing his partner. In the end, they both had the impression that they were not walking, but floating to the beat of the music. For the first time, Mia was ready to admit that dancing turned out to be quite a fun and enjoyable activity. She didn't expect Dante to dance so well, since he hadn't shown her his skills. The girl completely forgot that all aristocrats were properly trained in the rules of etiquette. Like everyone else, Van Dyke trained a lot before achieving a good result. The only difference was that he practiced dancing with his friends. The picture that popped into the lady's imagination made her laugh to the depths of her soul with its absurdity. Although Van Dyke himself did not like to remember those times, he was glad when his hostess smiled. They got so close to each other that the girl was struck by Dante's beautiful eyes. The heroine sincerely complimented her friend, as she once again admired his appearance. The pleasant words that Van Dyke immediately said to her in response did not sound so natural and sincere, but the assistant's gentle smile hinted that he was not joking at all during their conversation. Although Mia was not a generally accepted beauty, she was beautiful and desirable in her own way. The girl had never received such confessions before, which embarrassed her to the depths of her soul. But this time, she couldn't turn it all into a joke, because Dante looked quite serious. Van Dyke lacked the tact to realize how all his confessions sounded from the outside. So Fortuna found herself at a dead end, because her heart was beating loudly with excitement in her chest. But the lady didn't have time to ask whether the guy had feelings for her, because Eluard intervened in the conversation. While dancing pleasantly with Van Dyke, Miss didn't notice how it was time to change partners. Dante managed to hear how Mia had started asking him a question a second ago. But the cunning Eluard did not leave the lady a single opportunity to give an answer right now. For some reason, Van Dyke found himself upset by this situation, although he himself did not expect it. But the aristocrat managed to put on a polite smile that suited the moment. Although he already regretted that he had let his beloved mistress go to dance with the cunning and clever demon. Meanwhile, Mia was upset that she almost talked to Dante about her feelings. But she was not the main one in this story, because the princess was supposed to appear soon. However, by this point, the girl still couldn't find her eyes in the crowd of people. But, according to the plot, it was at this festival that Dante's favorite was supposed to meet him. But among the aristocrats, there was no one even remotely resembling a princess. But at that moment, Eluard attracted the attention of the girl, who began to look around. The demon could not allow the lady in his arms to think about any other people. Fortuna had completely forgotten how dangerous it was to relax while dancing with Eluard. The guy didn't need much persuading, and now he's already set the highlight of his dance moves. The guy did this on purpose so that the miss would have no opportunity to think about anything else. And now the lady completely forgot that she was trying to find the mysterious princess. She had to focus urgently on the demon so that he wouldn't do anything else. As a result, the heroine sincerely surrendered to the emotions she experienced during the dance. She did not neglect anyone, as she wanted to have fun with all the estate's assistants. Each of the guys reacted differently to the lady's pampering, but they all rejoiced along with her. As a result, Mia became so tired that she urgently needed a temporary rest in the restroom. The girl concentrated all her attention on her friends, so she didn't notice that they were watching her. The heroine could barely pull herself together, as she already wanted to go home as soon as possible. But her plans were not destined to come true, because some lady suddenly spoke to Fortuna. This Mrs. name was Karka O'Faze, and in fact she too was formerly of common descent. But Mia didn't know about this fact, although she would still have considered her new acquaintance incredibly beautiful. Karka immediately stated that a dress with such a simple design suited the newly minted aristocrat, and the heroine beamed with joy, because the beautiful lady had just given her a pleasant compliment. But at that moment, Mia heard Eluard's voice in her head, which told her that they were laughing at her. The lady didn't like the fact that the demon could eavesdrop on all her personal affairs, even in the restroom. So the first thing she did was rush to take off her earrings, although their effect was limited to the territory. Only this calmed Fortuna, and besides, O'Faze noticed the nervous state of her interlocutor. The heroine continued to smile sweetly at the girl, not believing that she had actually laughed at her. But Karka herself seemed like a harmless young lady who would not bully others. No matter what examples the assistant gave, Mia had a hard time believing his words about ridicule. And the demon himself was to blame for the fact that the heroine could not perceive his words normally. Despite all of Eluard's warnings, Fortuna decided to make a friend at any cost. So she said with a gentle smile that Karka's dress suited her very well. But with every word Mia said, O'Faze became more and more red and pale with displeasure. Eluard could clearly hear that the hostess had accidentally deeply insulted her interlocutor. The whole point was that Fortune had chosen descriptions for the dress that compared it to a fake. So, although the heroine did not at all want to achieve such an effect, she only hurt the lady more. But surprisingly, Karka was able to quickly pull herself together and hid all her emotions inside. But the lady was not going to forgive her deep humiliation because of her clothes so easily. She sneakily attacked Mia, forcing the girl to admit that she was of common descent. O'Faze was curious to know how it happened that the lady arrived at the ball with Dante, and Fortuna answered honestly that it was the will of the great ghost of the Garciel estate. But Karka again did not take such explanations seriously, because they seemed incredible to her. No matter what the heroine did, she had the impression that she was only arguing more and more with O'Faze. In the end, the girl couldn't take it anymore and ran away, because she hated being brazenly lied to. But Fortuna never once during their entire conversation said anything wrong. But she had to remain alone again, because the ladies avoided any communication with her. However, this rule did not apply to everyone, because there were aristocrats who were not afraid of condemnation. And Mia didn't immediately notice one of them in the room, since she was already completely upset because of the quarrel. This beautiful lady's name was Lydia Lux, and she knew Karka O'Faze better than anyone at the ball. And this time, Fortuna couldn't resist the compliment, but this lady took it correctly. Lydia did not have the same amount of insecurity and disdain for people that Karka did. And in fact, she only approached Mia because she overheard her conversation with O'Faze. This beautiful aristocrat had her own reasons for turning to the newly minted lady, but Mia wasn't sure she could answer questions from a girl she was seeing for the first time. It was obvious from Lydia that she really needed help, even from such a stranger. Mia herself still hasn't given up hope that she can find friends in high society. Besides, Lux looked like someone you could trust with anything. The heroine's heart was instantly broken into tiny pieces by such incredible beauty. But before making a decision, she contacted Eluard, as she would need his help. Only after this did Fortuna announce that she would not be opposed to a short conversation with the aristocrats. In response, the girl earned another truly beautiful smile from the charming Lita. And so, without even noticing, Mia found herself for the first time in the pleasant company of aristocrats. Navy Cerise, who could also boast of her beauty, was also in this company. Lydia briefly introduced both girls to each other to create a pleasant atmosphere. Just in case, Mia stated her name again and reminded that she was an ordinary commoner. The girl didn't expect that these ladies wouldn't care what her status was. This made the heroine wonder even more why the aristocrats had invited her to talk. It turned out that the whole thing was about how Fortuna responded to Karka's comment on her dress. Until now, Mia didn't believe that O'Faze had actually laughed at her, but Lydia confirmed it, and the girls accepted the new lady as a friend, as her bold and honest answer amazed them. Lydia and Nevi's true desire was to restore their friendship with Karka, and the girls thought that Mia could very well help them with this difficult task. More than anything in the world, the heroine wanted to accept this modest offer of friendship. However, Fortuna understood perfectly well that she would do wrong if she became their friend. No matter how much Lux tried to persuade her, Miss didn't believe that she could return Karka to them. After all, it was she who became the cause of Ophase's final upset after their short conversation. For some reason, the aristocrats continued to be stubborn, wanting to see Mia among their friends. And exactly at that moment, that same Karka appeared in the room, as she was looking for Lydia and Nevi. The presence of a lady she didn't like in this place came as a real surprise to her. Fortuna realized too late what an embarrassing situation she had so frivolously gotten herself into. And only Lux remained calm, hoping that Mia would be able to find the right words. However, Karka reacted extremely negatively to her new acquaintance, who had recently insulted her. The only excuse Mia could come up with was that she had been invited to this meeting by others. But what outraged Ophase most of all was that a girl of common blood was allowed into the company of aristocrats. Lydia calmly reminded them that they never judged their friends by their status or wealth. And Karka had nothing to say in response to this, because otherwise her friends would not have communicated with her. Only now did the heroine learn from Eluard that Ophase was actually the same as her. The assistant did not admit where the information came from, but he assured me of its veracity. In the end, Mia stood up for both herself and Karka, saying that they were worthy of the invitation. But Ophase couldn't stand the fact that someone else was smarter than her. Until the very end, the lady indirectly insulted Fortuna, although she had done nothing bad to her. Suddenly, the girls heard cheerful laughter nearby, so they had to stop arguing. An unfamiliar lady appeared before Mia, who was the princess of the empire named Alexis Chartasen. Only the heroine did not recognize the heir to the throne, since she had never met her before. But all the other aristocrats quickly reacted and bowed politely to the ruler. Only thanks to this did Mia find out who exactly she had the honor of talking to now. In the story, this lady was famous for her abilities, thanks to which she rose to the throne. The heroine was too carried away by thoughts about Dante's love and completely forgot about her relatives. Only this time, for some reason, Eluard did not answer how Mia should behave with the heiress. The girl noticed the awkward silence between them, but had no idea how to fix it. Only Lydia suggested to Fortuna that she should not forget about communication etiquette. Mia remembered too late that she had failed to show respect to such an important person. However, the princess did not even think of being angry with the lady, including because she had heard a lot about her. In this acquaintance, Alexis pursued her own goals, which she did not intend to reveal to anyone. Even the heroine, who read the plot of the novel, had no idea about the princess's true desires. Chartanes gave the girls permission to be informal, accompanied by a silly joke. Mia didn't expect Alexis to act so carelessly in front of others, but the other ladies highly appreciated the princess's wit, understanding her clever play on words. Altogether, they began to laugh loudly, but only to appease the heir to the throne. This whole situation seemed extremely stupid to Fortuna, but she could not admit it. So the heroine joked back, confused, hoping that Alexis would approve of her words. The joke ended up being so successful that Chartanes was genuinely delighted. It turned out that the lady's years of office work and her compliments to her bosses had not been in vain. The princess liked the girl so much that she invited her to the hunting festival in a couple of days. However, Mia was wary of the fact that she had received such a difficult invitation so unexpectedly. But, like other ladies, Fortuna had no right to refuse the future ruler herself. Surely all the ladies were put in this position, and that is why they pretended to be happy. Lydia and Nevi did their best to support their new friend, hoping that she would be able to prepare. The heroine almost went blind from their sincere smiles. They tried so hard for her. Alexis eventually got Mia to accept her invitation to the hunting festival. The princess still had a lot to do, so she could not linger around the aristocrats. But before leaving, Chartanes couldn't help but joke again to see the fake reactions of the people. All the aristocrats immediately picked up the joke, since they had no right to react differently. And only Mia didn't understand this joke, since she hadn't had time to get used to this manner of communication. In fact, the lady did not want to go to the hunting festival, but everything had already been decided for her. From the girls, she learned that usually everyone present hunted magical beasts. Each of the ladies not only knew how to fence, but also shot well with special guns. And Mia's skills alone were not enough, although everyone else supported her abilities. This is how the heroine found herself drawn into a competition she didn't want to attend. Until the very end, Fortuna did not believe that her fencing skills would be enough to win. And Lydia suggested to the girl that it was not necessary to win this hunting competition. The aristocrats confidently promised that they would not let anyone harm their new acquaintance, who was mastering etiquette. Both Lydia and Nevi were full of enthusiasm and faith that Mia would definitely succeed. After such support, the heroine could no longer refuse to participate under a plausible pretext. She was also very eager to show off everything she could learn in a short period of time. Only after this was Fortuna able to return to the main hall, feeling completely exhausted. Dante immediately noticed that the hostess had been gone too long for a regular trip to the toilet. Only now did Mia remember that all this time she had been unable to maintain contact with Eluard. But the demon didn't ignore the lady on purpose, because he really didn't hear her messages. This could only happen if the magic on the earrings somehow dissipated. Van Dyke was the most tense of all when he heard that the lady had met the princess. There was strong protective magic around her, so the spell on the earrings wore off. Only the faithful assistant was concerned that Mia had recently spoken with Alexis. But Fortuna had a good impression of Chartenez, if you forget about her strange jokes. It turned out that Mia wasn't the only one who couldn't understand the princess's jokes, as she had many of them. It was time to leave. But the heroine could not find Ezekiel and Killian anywhere. They were busy. The whole thing was that Alexis urgently called them to her for a secret conversation. It was important for Chartenez to know if her loyal assistants remembered her recent order for them. And none of the guys dared to forget the princess's instructions, which could not be disobeyed. However, recently, even the head of the Mage Tower could not completely follow the instructions, but there was still a danger that a powerful demon really was sleeping inside Fortuna. A squad of the finest knights was tasked with eliminating the girl if the creature began to awaken. But during the dialogues with Mia, no one noticed in her even a drop of that danger and strength. Alexis herself had time to see for herself that it was Fortuna who did not seem to be the demon's host. But all this did not allow the princess to cancel the mission for her personal squad of the best knights. While Chartenez would have preferred Mia to be clean, she was considering all options. What the heiress liked most was the suspicious Fortuna's excellent sense of humor. In order to finally test the girl, the princess invited her to go hunting. She was confident that Ezekiel would do a great job of monitoring the demon inside Mia. No one dared to contradict Alexis when she made a decision, even if it was unpleasant for others. So the knights obediently bowed to the heiress, accepting her new task. Shantares called her assistants again to remind them to remain constantly vigilant. More than anything in the world, she was afraid that the tragedy with the escaped demon would happen again. But the heroine herself had no idea about the passions that were going on around her. She was only concerned about how everyone would get back to the estate. Ellard was one of the first to escape from the ball, simply disappearing into thin air with the help of magic. Mia didn't even have time to ask him to take her with him so that she wouldn't have to shake on the trip again. So the lady had no choice but to return home in an ordinary carriage. But as soon as she turned to Ezekiel, the boy noticeably darkened, thinking about his task. The heroine didn't know what exactly was troubling him, but she was genuinely concerned about this situation. She took liberties and put her hand on the guy's head to check his temperature. Only in this way did the girl become convinced that, physically, everything was completely fine with her friend. But such caring actions only made Ezekiel's heart heavier, because the task was still there. He immediately remembered Dante's recent question about whether a magician could kill a girl without thinking. But these worries were countered by the stern face of the princess, who would not tolerate defeat. That was why it was so difficult for Ezekiel to communicate with the sweet lady at the moment. Mia had no idea what was going on in her friend's soul, and therefore could not help him in any way. However, once again, the girl was saved from her difficult thoughts by her very first assistant. Dante, with a slight smile, invited Miss to take a walk with him while the weather permitted. Although it was unexpected, Fortuna did not see any reason to refuse the guy. She enjoyed getting closer to him little by little every day, learning new things, and Van Dyke was in solidarity with the hostess in this feeling, although he himself did not realize it. Along the way, Mia happily shared her first and good impressions of the ball. Dante was already happy, because the girl's face was constantly smiling joyfully. At that moment, they both enjoyed each other's company, without thinking about the consequences at all. But the lady still shared her concerns about taking part in the hunt. Like everything in high society, the heroine was forced to take part in this competition for the first time. So Mia was genuinely worried that she might not catch a single magical beast at all. That's why Fortuna called an assistant with her, because with him, she had a high chance of winning. Previously, Dante promised the lady that he would always be there, so he did not refuse this time. Only now did the assistant remember that the hostess wanted to tell him something during the ball. Mia had long since lost the moment, but the interest inside her was still quite strong. But Van Dyke didn't expect Fortuna to ask him about his romantic feelings for her. The heroine was expecting any answer, but not one of uncertainty in the guy. It turned out that Dante himself did not consider his actions as a love interest for the girl. While she clearly saw that this concern was not simply due to necessity, the problem was that Van Dyke did things for the lady only because he wanted to. So, with her question, the heroine accidentally drove her faithful assistant into a real dead end. As soon as the girl realized this, she blushed deeply, wishing she could rewind time. Mia confessed to Dante that if he continued to care for her, it would mean he had feelings for her. However, the guy still couldn't understand why it all worked this way. Love was always a closed topic for Van Dyke, so he was unable to recognize it in time. So the assistant had to honestly admit that he did not understand his feelings for the lady. At that moment, the heroine remembered the backstory of the novel she had gotten into by accident. Dante was raised cruelly from childhood, so he rarely experienced human emotions. So the guy's confused face was the most the girl could get out of him. Suddenly, Mia felt sorry for this man who had done so much for the good of the Empire. Therefore, Fortuna forgot about all the awkwardness and suggested that they continue to remain close friends. She tried her best to hide the enormous embarrassment that was blazing inside her. For this reason, the lady finished her walk much earlier. Because she could not help herself, she left Van Dyke alone, but now it was good for him, because he wanted to think alone. The very next day, thoughts of hunting displaced all other worries within Fortuna. She couldn't ask Dante to teach her, so she turned to another good candidate. But Ezekiel wasn't thrilled that Miss was pestering him with questions again. All this time, the boy had been practicing cooking, so he had a lot of waste for fertilizer. Although Mia distracted her friend from his work, she really needed help with her studies. But the magician had no idea how to shoot weapons properly, because he only used magic. He immediately suggested that Fortuna turn to Dante, but Miss did not even consider this option. She awkwardly lied that the assistant was too busy cleaning to be distracted. In response, the boy grumbled that he had been spending all his time cooking, so he couldn't help. His suggestion to find someone more physically fit actually made sense. In this regard, Killian could teach Fortuna a lot, if only she asked. Right now, the knight was once again devoting a lot of time to training little Toto, but the lady wasn't sure that the swordmaster could tell her anything about firearms. She didn't expect that the knights at the military academy would necessarily have multidisciplinary training. Therefore, if Killian agrees to train Mia, she will not lose anything at all. The girl only had to delicately persuade the assistant so that he would not refuse her, like the others. It turned out that the guy was already aware of all the latest events related to the hunting festival. He had already learned about this from Dante, so he thought that the hostess would turn to Van Dyke. But the fact that Mia chose him ultimately appealed to the good-natured knight. The heroine was delighted that someone would finally teach her how to hold a gun correctly. But the girl's ideas about training were fundamentally different from what happened later. Killian began to chase the lady around the garden, since using the weapon required stamina. As soon as Miss slowed down, even for a moment, the sharp-eyed guy immediately urged her on again. The knight intended to impart as many skills as possible to his mistress in a short time, and the girl tried her best, because she dreamed of winning the hunt. This is how Mia's unbearably difficult training began, for which she was not prepared. Already after the first task, Fortuna felt as if she was ready to die right on the spot. Killian explained that he made the lady run so that she could test her limits. Mia immediately guessed that this was exactly what had once happened to the knight himself. And for the first time, the guy did not deny the fact that he had experienced a real magical overload. The girl knew that this side effect occurred when someone abused magic. And Killian confirmed this fact because he once invested his aura to strengthen a sharp sword. But he also had his own limit, which the guy deliberately crossed during the fight. The result was that the knight's body instantly began to transform into a monster. During that incident, Killian almost lost his life, which he remembered well even now. It remained a mystery to the heroine how the knight had been able to survive in such a difficult situation. It turned out that he owed his life to Ezekiel, who had crafted this armor in time. The boy was so brilliant that he saved the life of his close friend with the help of magic. Before, Mia had no idea that the tower leader could be so sentimental inside. But all his close ones were well aware of this contradictory nature of the powerful Ezekiel. Only now did Fortuna learn that this trinity had long served the princess together, and the revelations that came from the knight made the lady understand how much all these people suffered. The knight himself believed that his life was over at this point, since there was no way to return. So now Killian will have to live forever, with regrets for his excessive actions. But the girl perceived the situation differently for the guy, who was now forced to wear armor. Killian didn't expect anyone to think he'd lived his life doing everything he could for others. Mia believed that, thanks to soldiers like these who sacrificed themselves, she could smile with peace of mind. Therefore, Fortune was proud of the knight, although he blamed himself for his lack of restraint on the battlefield. But with a couple of sentences, the lady convinced the knight, because she was delighted with his current protection. So Killian couldn't help but admit that he really had become stronger, despite all the unpleasant nuances. In fact, the assistant had been waiting for a long time for a person who would show him sincere gratitude. So the guy only became more eager to teach the girl as many skills as possible. Little did Fortuna know that she had become the catalyst for continuing her own torment in her studies. From now on, the knight was eager to squeeze every last drop of juice out of the lady, just so she could succeed in the competition. But the heroine could barely stand on her feet after her recent run, so she was only ready for rest. But any objections were not accepted from Miss, because that's what her updated strict teacher said. Killian reminded her that at times like these, the girl was building up her muscles, so she had to keep training. As much as Mia objected, her wishes were no longer taken into account in this difficult training. Thus, Fortuna signed her own death warrant by devoting all her time to grueling training. The knight even made sure that Mia could improve her imperfect balance. The guy was deliberately being cunning during the training, constantly increasing its duration for the girl. As a result, the heroine was completely exhausted and dreamed of at least one glass of clean drinking water. Killian couldn't refuse Miss this, although he ordered her not to be distracted from her current training. On the way, he met Ezekiel, who was unhappy that his friend had blabbed about the magical overload. The knight did not expect that the magician, who was nearby, would stoop to simply eavesdropping on others. He honestly admitted that he relaxed around Mia, which is why he told her part of his personal life. Killian was afraid that he would not find support in Ezekiel because he had made a difficult decision inside himself. The knight was no longer confident that he would be able to carry out the princess's order if it were required soon. This surprised the magician, because this was already the second person who refused to kill Mia to save the future of people. But the boy quickly hid his emotions, because he remembered that Killian never feared punishment from Alexis. The magician still hasn't decided which side he'll be on if the situation takes a nasty turn. But he also couldn't kill Fortuna right now, who seemed like the most innocent and sweet girl in the world. Ezekiel continued to watch the lady, in whom he found absolutely nothing dangerous. That is why, with each passing day, he began to doubt more and more the necessity of his difficult task. Mia herself had no idea that all her assistants had gathered nearby only by order of the princess. And, like the rest of his friends, Ezekiel needed time to sort out his emotions. When Fortuna's training ended, she could barely crawl back to her estate on her own. Every muscle in the girl's body was shaking, because Killian did not spare her even for a moment. So now the lady had to go through another test and get to a soft bed. But in the corridor, she suddenly met Dante, who wanted to say a few words to his beloved mistress. It turned out that the assistant had prepared a relaxing tea for the lady to reward her for her training. But the heroine wasn't ready to talk to the guy after yesterday, because she felt awkward. So she hurried away from the conversation under the pretext that she was very tired from class. The girl hoped that Van Dyke would not follow her, because she could not confess her feelings to him. But Dante directly asked why Mia didn't come to study with him for the hunting festival. It was no secret that he shot better than all the current assistants of the huge estate. However, the confusion inside Fortuna did not allow her to address the guy as before. The heroine came up with some ridiculous excuses just to avoid admitting her true awkwardness. She quickly ran away, as she was unable to continue the conversation with the handsome guy. And Dante was left alone with the heavy thoughts that had been bothering him lately. But Mia was so focused on her feelings that she couldn't explain anything to her assistant. After yesterday's conversation, the girl's heart began to beat treacherously loudly inside her. She herself did not understand why she was so agitated by an ordinary situation that she often found herself in. But now, Mia really needed time to get used to her recent shame. It was for this reason alone that the lady decided to temporarily avoid Dante until she felt better. But days passed, and Miss was still not ready to honestly admit to the guy the reason why she did not communicate with him. Dante tried to help the girl many times, but she always came up with various excuses. For the next few days, Miss did not allow him to clean her room, just to avoid making eye contact. And so, before the heroine could even notice, the long-awaited day of the hunting festival had arrived. But even thoughts about the upcoming competition did not distract the girl from her thoughts about Dante. She herself understood that this could not continue any longer, so they needed to talk. But then the aristocrats, who had previously tried to become her real friends, approached the miss. As usual, Fortuna greeted the girls with aloofness, observing all the rules of etiquette. And this hurt Lydia a little, because she wanted to maintain friendly communication between them. Mia didn't expect the ladies to remember it even better than she did, so she quickly rectified the situation. And Lydia and Nevi were pleased that Fortuna still perceived them as friends. Only Karka did not join this conversation, as she avoided talking to Mia. But even so, the aristocrats noticed how much stronger Fortuna had become over the last few days of training. Before the festival, the lady really trained as if she didn't feel tired at all. And she was glad that even from the outside, it was clear that her training had produced good results. But this conversation was not destined to last long, because Dante entered the girls' tent fully armed. The guy amazed everyone present at first sight with his incredible beauty and elegance. It was no trouble for him to confuse everyone around him, although the assistant himself was not aware of this strange nuance. But he noticed that Mia's face was covered with an incomprehensible blush, to which the heroine had no clear answer. Fortuna's friends warmly noted that she looked good next to her fiancé. Therefore, the lady had no choice but to continue playing the role of being in love with Van Dyke. Although Mia herself would have preferred to talk about other topics that would not embarrass her so much. But it turned out that numerous rumors had already started circulating about the heroine's ideal suitors. Moreover, someone was sure that there were at least 200 of them, and all of them were madly in love with the girl. Fortuna had no idea that the little lies her friends told at the ball would lead to rumors that would be so far from the truth. But Mia was saved from confession by Dante, who expressed a desire to talk to her alone. But this was not part of the lady's plans, as she was not ready to talk to the guy. As soon as the aristocrats left, an awkward silence fell again between the two good friends, and Fortuna could not help herself because she was still embarrassed in front of her faithful assistant. She was grateful to Dante for starting the conversation first, even though it was an attack on her. In the last few days, the heroine really did desperately avoid Van Dyke, which could not be hidden from him. The assistant himself had no idea that that short conversation after the ball was to blame for everything. He was only worried that his mistress no longer liked him. But that was far from the truth, as Mia reported. Only now did Fortuna find the strength to honestly say that she ran away from her friend, only because of the awkwardness inside. She had no idea what kind of reaction this would cause in the guy, so she had been wary for the last few days. But Dante, with a gentle smile, asked the lady never to avoid him again because of such strange little things. He was genuinely sad that there had been a long-term misunderstanding between him and the lady. Mia took the first step towards application and promised that she would discuss any questions in the future. This visibly pleased the guy, who himself had no intention of hiding anything from his beloved mistress. In fact, he didn't come for no reason, because he had a nice gift for the girl with him. It was a locator specially created for this moment, which showed the location of the carrier. But the lady did not understand why Dante gave her such a thing, because she would never be alone at the competition. But the assistant was so worried about Mia that he wanted to provide every possible safety measure. He was ready to rush to Miss at any moment if the subject reported that something was wrong with her. The girl's heart felt warm just from this, so she completely forgot about the awkwardness. Then the rest of the assistants came to the hostess's tent, and they also didn't come empty-handed. But Fortuna was horrified not delighted, at the sight of Killian's nightmarish gift. The guy himself didn't see any problem in bringing a real skull for Fortuna as a helmet. He was sure that this thing could save the girl's life in many situations, because it was strong. But Mia did not share her assistant's feelings, as she shuddered at the mere sight of the helmet. While the knight advertised this cool item in various ways, against Fortune's wishes, he placed a strong helmet on her head, causing the lady to almost fall down. The weight of the helmet was so enormous that Mia could not lift her head to a natural position. Therefore, the lady suggested an alternative to the skull in the form of decorating one of the walls of their huge estate. In any case, the girl was only glad that the assistants tried so hard for her. But the surprises didn't end there, because Ezekiel also presented the lady with a small magical gift. The boy made everything so that it was impossible to determine the magic in this object at first glance, and only when the heroine put it on did she understand the beauty of this unusual gift. This monocle allowed one to aim accurately at a chosen object so as not to miss when shooting. Although, it is unlikely that the lady will need it at all, since Ezekiel was planning to go with her. For the first time in her life, the heroine felt the warmth of having true friends give her gifts. The lady was so touched that she could not find suitable words to express her gratitude. But then the sweet scene was interrupted by Princess Alexis herself with her unexpected appearance. Chartanez couldn't help but notice that the assistants were truly close to their beloved owner. She also casually mentioned that Mia looked much more fit than when they first met. The heroine was only glad that Alexis herself complimented her endurance during preparation. The princess no longer felt that she had been wrong to invite Mia to participate in a hunt for which she was not ready. But in reality, Alexis was much more interested in the rumors of an engagement between Fortuna and Van Dyck. Dante understood perfectly well that in every word of the heiress, there was a hidden meaning only for him. And although the heroine was overjoyed by the compliments from the princess, everyone else was tense. As always, Alexis accompanied her words with silly jokes that only she liked. Chartanez laughed heartily at any witticisms that instantly came into her head. This year, Alexis had no intention of losing, so she immediately warned everyone around her about the serious competition. The heiress once again did not forget to shout out one of her stupid jokes that she liked so much as a farewell. But Mia prayed that someone would finally take the collection of such frivolous jokes away from the princess. At this moment, Dante finally dared to say something to his hostess, no matter what her reaction would be later. But Ezekiel reminded them at the wrong time that it was time for them to head out to the training field. So Fortuna had to postpone this conversation until better times, because she needed to concentrate on the hunt. As much as Van Dyck didn't want to stop the girl, she silently walked past him towards the exit of the tent. The assistant had the impression that if he let the lady go now, he would lose a lot, and the guy didn't want to live any longer, with the feeling of regret that he hadn't immediately said everything he thought. It was only for this reason that he confidently stopped Fortuna, since he nevertheless decided to talk to her right now. Mia noticed that Dante's feelings were deep, because he even grabbed the hem of her clothes. In fact, the lady had nothing against it, since in most cases, Van Dyck observed all the proprieties. Only now did the assistant hand the girl a beautiful handkerchief with the lady's initials embroidered on it. Mia was still not very familiar with the traditions among the aristocrats, so she did not understand its meaning. But Dante knew that during a hunt, the bride or groom should be given a similar handkerchief. What impressed the girl most was that the guy had carefully embroidered the item with his own hands. The scarf looked like something any embroidery master would envy, selling similar scarves. For several nights in a row, the assistant worked hard for this gift, because he wanted to please the lady. The heroine couldn't believe that Van Dyck had really tried so hard to make the scarf. But Mia didn't think she had the right to accept such things, since their engagement was fake. But the guy quickly convinced the lady that he made the scarf only because he sincerely wanted to give it as a gift. So Dante would be very upset if the girl refused to accept this precious gift. Fortuna had no idea that her ambiguous answer could hurt the usually collected guy so much. In fact, she had nothing against the scarf. She was just too embarrassed by the value of the gift. Miss made the right decision and simply thanked the guy for his attention and care. Van Dyck wouldn't be upset even if the girl lost the competition. It was much more important to him that Miss returned safe and sound after the hunt. The assistant, with a slight smile, gave Mia instructions to be careful in the forest, and just a few minutes later, the heroine began participating in the competition together with Ezekiel. But the girl's consciousness constantly drifted towards the pleasant gifts she had received, so she was not thinking about hunting, but about sweet Dante, who was even better in her imagination. Fortune could not allow her to return empty-handed from the battlefield now. Ezekiel walked silently next to his mistress and did not disturb her thoughts the whole time. The boy was confident that Miss would be able to catch as many as 10 magical animals. Mia herself did not expect that the assistant's predictions for her would turn out to be so good. It turned out that the magician meant 10 animals about the size of an ant. The heroine was noticeably offended by this wording, although in some ways Ezekiel was right. After all, the girl shuddered in fear at every sound that this forest made. This time, it turned out that a magical animal really did jump out at them, but it was too small. But immediately after him, the hand of an incredibly huge creature descended onto the clearing. Even Ezekiel froze in fear, as he did not expect to meet this magical beast. For the first time in her life, the heroine encountered a hand that she could not grasp with her eyes. The magician recognized in this monster too late the powerful Asmodeus, who appeared rarely. And now even Ezekiel would have difficulty dealing with this creature, which amazed with its skills. The boy knew that this beast only appeared near high-level gates. And immediately after his words, the lady noticed the very gates that the assistant had just spoken about. Fortune could do nothing in this terrible situation, which was beyond her strength. So the girl could only look at the animal, which was calmly wandering through the forest. Upon seeing this beast, the competition management immediately ordered everyone to get out of the forest. This monster was striking with just his scream, and he hadn't even started a fight. Ezekiel created a shield in time to save himself and his mistress from the sound wave. The boy understood that the girl's safety was his top priority, so he began to cast a spell to send her back to the camp, where the lady would be protected. The assistant did not listen to any of the lady's objections, because he believed that it would be better that way. But Mia couldn't allow herself to leave Ezekiel all alone in the middle of the forest. She focused on her emotions and screamed in protest for him to hear her. Exactly after this, Ezekiel's magic fell from Fortuna, as if he had not cast any spell at all. At first, the boy didn't believe that his magic really hadn't worked at that moment for some reason. He sincerely could not understand who Mia was, if magical powers did not work on her. The powerful mage had never experienced anything like this on the battlefield before. The heroine herself had no idea what they were talking about or why Ezekiel was so worried. She obediently froze in place, while the assistant tried to cast at least one spell on her, but they all immediately dissipated from the girl, as if the guy had only applied them temporarily. Ezekiel didn't understand why his magic didn't work on the lady it was so important to save. But Asmodeus didn't care whether her opponents had any difficulties with defense, but the heroine managed to push Ezekiel under the shield in time, which he had not removed all this time. The boy noticed how scared the girl was, but she still saved him. Mia wouldn't be able to forgive herself if she allowed her assistant to suffer in such a situation. But for a magician, such behavior was unheard of, because the lady could barely save herself. The guy understood perfectly well that if the barrier had failed, they both would have died on the spot. But for Fortuna, the protection of employees, which the boss always provided, was important. The magician always encountered people who thought only about their own protection on the battlefield. In critical moments, as a rule, no one cares what happens to a comrade. Therefore, the girl's behavior seemed unreasonable to the magician, who had never encountered such selflessness. But he didn't have time to think, because the monster let out a loud and dangerous cry again. Asmodeus was preparing to attack again, and this time the shield would not be able to protect his friends. But, as before, Mia quickly covered Ezekiel with her body. Although she could not do anything, all she could do was pray for salvation, and soon it came just in time. Dante noticed on the locator that something was wrong with his mistress, so he quickly came running. Never before had the lady been so delighted to see a faithful and strong assistant. He wisely took Killian with him, who was also skilled on the battlefield. The only thing Van Dyke couldn't understand was why Ezekiel didn't send the lady to safety. So the boy had to admit that his magic didn't work on Fortuna. This once again confirmed to Dante that Mia was indeed different from the average person in the Empire. But they didn't have time to discuss this topic, because new monsters were coming from the gate. The open gates generously showered the surrounding area with creatures of various shapes and sizes. But Fortunately for our heroes, they could easily deal with these creatures. Dante quickly shot down anyone who dared to approach his group from the depths of the forest. It was clear to everyone that it was necessary to close the gates that were spewing out monsters as quickly as possible. Ezekiel took on a defensive mission for himself because Mia was in great danger in this place, and Killian promised to provide worthy support for Van Dyke so that he would not be stabbed in the back. The knight turned out to be such a powerful swordsman that he dealt with his enemies without any problems. With just a couple of swings of his sword, he tore some of the most unpleasant monsters to pieces. Dante, meanwhile, focused his magic entirely on closing the huge gates. His spell began to work almost immediately, and all that remained was to hope that its power would be enough. The girl would never have thought that her friends could be so strong, but she herself shouldn't relax, because there were many magical animals running around the forest. One of them purposefully attacked the shield, taking advantage of the fact that his friends were distracted. His hands pounded the defense with incredible speed, threatening to destroy it at any moment. Ezekiel himself did not expect that he would begin to give in even against such a not very strong monster. But he remembered well the warnings from his mentor that he forbade the use of all magic. The teacher was sure that if Ezekiel broke the ban, the power would begin to devour him from within. But the presence of Fortuna near him radically changed the boy's previous desires. The lady's words about her having to protect her assistants forever remained in the magician's memory. So he made a difficult decision for himself, because he saw no other way out of this situation. The heroine had to close her eyes from the bright light that filled the entire space inside the shield. The thing was, Ezekiel had his limitations. Just like Killian and his armor,